Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This is S4A Livestream number 94, being recorded on Thursday, April 13. We do these streams usually every Wednesday, sometimes on Thursday, and we're trying to get caught up on COVID articles, helping people to understand the seriousness of COVID-19, the need to mask, vaccinate, stop the spread in general. Actually, the governments are correct that COVID is serious, but they're not even heeding their own advice. We need to not dismantle the pandemic response. We need to put it back together. Remantle, that's not a word. But we need mask mandates. We need contact tracing. We need weekly testing in schools and all large institutional employers. We need to actually stop spreading this virus for a lot of different reasons. It keeps mutating into more and more dangerous forms. And the vaccines, while useful, and you should stay up to date on your vaccines, they do reduce your odds of severe disease. They don't provide sterilizing immunity where you just, you beat the infection off the bat. There's been different responses, but especially with the new variants, BQ and XBB variants. We're going to look at articles today that show that the antibody response drops way, way down, where people's antibody response was much better, like 90% rapid neutralization against the pre-BQ strains. Now we are basically 3 strains into things that parts of the virus have mutated, that even the some of the different vaccines like Novavax, which was targeting parts of the virus that are the least likely to mutate, what are called the conserved epitopes, parts of the virus that have stayed pretty much unchanged for 3 years. And so this was like a big selling point of Novavax, is like it's even better than the mRNA, some would say, although a lot of the overall efficacy was similar, maybe slightly better. And for people who didn't want the mRNA, there was this other alternative. And unfortunately now, with BQ, which I believe is a descendant of BA5, which BA5 and BA4 were driving last year's plateau in the summer and then the fall. And then in the late fall, BQ1 and BQ1.1 came in. And then they drove the late fall into early winter thing. And then XBB 1.5 came in after that. And now XBB 1.5 is dominant, and that wave is receding. But XBB 0.1.16 and or XBB 0.1.9.1 are coming in. Those 2 strains I just mentioned have a growth advantage over XBB 1.5. XBB 116 is coming out of India, I believe, and 1.19, I'm not sure where it came from, might be US originated, but they're both in the US now. And because they have a growth advantage over the XBB 0.1.5, it's probably just a matter of time before they knock that off of its perch and then drive a new strain. So in other words, we're coming into the 3rd wave of variants where the vaccines, while helpful, may not be as strong as it was before. And even that left something to be desired, because there were a lot of breakthrough cases and things like that. So in other words, masking is number 1. You need to prevent the virus from getting in your body. Then B, stay current with your vaccines, the best that you can find, whatever it is in your area, the updated bivalent, whatever. Get that as plan B. But plan A is don't let the virus into your body. People are being amazingly lax about this now. And so we're going to be covering all of the many very serious, not just short-term acute harms of COVID, but the long-term harms, the long COVID, the organ damage, increased risk of clots and heart attacks and strokes, brain damage, immune damage, all of the other things that COVID does. And we're going to go through articles about that. It's a very serious thing. The U.S. should not be ending its pandemic status as Biden just did. Part of it ended this week. Part of it's going to be ending next month. There were 2 sort of declarations made. Anyway, it's a bad move. We need to go back to taking COVID seriously and not, just pretending like nothing's going on. That's not going to help us at all. So anyway, I'm here in the chat with 38 people, twitch.tv/socialism S4A. And so we had, actually, I guess I can start with this now. We had a little bit of a scare yesterday because the channel got a community strike. And I thought that this might have been, so I haven't gotten a community strike on S4A since about almost 2 full years, something like 20 to 22 months. The last community strike I got was in a video that I did, believe it was like late spring of 2021, so really a while ago, in which I was criticizing Jimmy Dore and Joe Rogan for they were going on about all kinds of like crazy anti-vax stuff and everything like that. And got a community strike, couldn't get it appealed. Anyway, it eventually expired and, got back to normal. Or was it a warning? Anyway, I can't remember. But it's over. It didn't have any sort of like lasting impact on the channel. Then yesterday, so there was an interesting thing that happened. This is like kind of a little bit of drama, but let's just cover it. So people who are familiar with Caleb Maupin, this is a person who used to be in the Workers' World Party, which is a Marxist, Marxist party. Marxists are sort of an offshoot of Trotskyism in the U.S. Let me just find where I put this thing. And he has gone on a whole sharp right turn, let's say, covering for sort of the worst kinds of revisionism within the Marxist world, and then doing conferences with neo-fascists and things like this. His channel, for example, has videos like this, Billionaire Communist, No Contradiction. I remember that was one of the first ones I saw, and I'm like, what the hell is this guy talking about? And he was talking about the Russian Communist Party and billionaire associated with that. And then, but if you search on his channel, Socialist Billionaires, yes, let me explain. And then the one that he got a lot of shit over was Abolish Billionaires as Anti-Marxist. Communism means vast abundance and expanding wealth. So he was putting out these like garbage lines about, so then what happened was, if people are familiar with the channel Maoist Rebel News, Jason Unruh used to be, he's been doing the YouTube communism thing for like a long time. And so, he's been familiar with Maupin, and of course there's a lot of overlap in the audiences, or at least there used to be, things like that. So he had Maupin on the show to be like, what the fuck are you talking about? Socialism is when we're all billionaires, and Maupin was trying to defend this on Twitter. And it's like, well, just because there's a lot of wealth created in socialism, it doesn't mean that you personally own it. Like those trains that were in the last picture. Do I personally own one of those trains? Like, how does this work? So it's really an odd way to put it, or dramatically misleading would be more accurate way to put it, that, socialism is when we're all billionaires. Except it's social wealth, not personal wealth. So anyway, and then Unruh followed up with videos on the Maupin extreme right turn. This was around the time when Maupin was accused by members of his organization, which started out as a youth socialist organization, and then I guess some of the people, aged over 21 or whatever, and they didn't call it a youth organization anymore. But he was accused by multiple members of his organization of sexual exploitation and really bad shit. Since that time, he's kind of dropped off the radar. The other thing that happened is that people who were in this, as we call PATSOC, or Patriotic Socialist, that was a name they sort of got stuck with over some of the like online discourse that was happening and some of the positions that they took. So the PATSOCs, him and Jackson Hinkle and Infracell and other people in that vein, it became clear that they were all connected with Lyndon LaRouche. LaRouche is a fascist. Maupin himself wrote about that. So if we go back to 2009 for a second and look at, where do we have it? Yeah, Maupin on LaRouche. Here we go. So this was an article, if you want to know who Lyndon LaRouche was and everything, which is really what's behind this PATSOC, highly revisionist, right-wing stuff that was being put out, especially last year and somewhat in late 2021. Here's Maupin's old article back when he was in Workers' World Party. LaRouche is no, quote, socialist. The corporate media is doing another disservice to real socialists and communists by mislabeling Lyndon LaRouche as a communist or socialist, as his followers attack and disrupt healthcare reform meetings. So remember, this is 2009 during the ACA Obamacare debate, like, are we going to get Medicare for all? What are we going to get? And there was a lot of public discourse about that at that time. These activities add a new chapter to this group's reactionary history, abetted by misrepresentation in the corporate media. LaRouche's gang has stood outside town hall meetings holding pictures of Obama with a Hitler-style mustache and the words, "I've changed." The media have attempted to use LaRouche's behavior to attack the left. When covering the rightist attacks on healthcare proposals, several newspapers and television programs have identified LaRouche's followers and their despicable sign as communist, socialist, and leftist. Such claims are a great falsehood and distortion of reality. LaRouche has a long record of serving the capitalist ruling class by attacking progressive movements. Anyone who knows the real history of the left can identify his political philosophy and teaching as dripping with racism, sexism, anti-Semitism, and bigotry against lesbian, gay, bi, and trans people. It is true that back in the late 1960s, LaRouche was identified with a tendency that was briefly part of the left, but it soon switched to the opposite side of the class struggle. By the mid-1970s, it was obvious to anyone on the left in the U.S. that he was no socialist or communist. And let me add to that, LaRouche was interviewed on a program called Evans and Novak from 1986 when he was running for in the Democratic primaries for president. And he said in that interview that, well, the left thing was always overblown. They basically infiltrated SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, in order to pull people away from the left and to, quote, combat the left problem on its own terrain. So, I mean, he was never left at all. As he says, the left thing was overblown. So he was always a right-winger, and then it got worse. So continuing, this became apparent in the early 1970s when his group launched what it called Operation Mop-Up, in which his followers violently attacked meetings of leftist and Marxist groups, especially the Communist Party USA, with lead pipes, chains, and other makeshift weapons. In 1973, LaRouche mobilized a campaign against revolutionary poet Amiri Baraka, using not political arguments, but slandering the African-American political cultural leader, and in a viciously racist act, put a caricature of Baraka's face on the body of a hyena on the front page of a pamphlet published by his newspaper, the misnamed New Solidarity. The KKK and other fascist organizations joined his group's demonstration against Baraka. Most people on the left consider him as a neo-fascist, although he never had this kind of mass following that groups like the openly racist KKK or the White Citizens Council could claim at some points in their history. In 1986, LaRouche's publishing house openly published and distributed the writings of a Nazi general named Friedrich August Freiherr von der Heyde. This book, the first English translation of his work, had an introduction by LaRouche himself. During the AIDS crisis, LaRouche said he supported the, quote, accelerated death of people with AIDS in order to, quote, cleanse the country of the disease. He also praised European skinhead gangs that randomly murdered LGBT people. LaRouche put himself on the same side as the nuclear energy industry by organizing the Fusion Energy Foundation, also publicized and championed Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, popularly known as Star Wars, etc. So this is published in the Workers' World thing. Maupin started out knowing all of this stuff and put it in his campaign. So where did he end up? Well, interestingly, before he was in Workers' World Party, he was an Avakian. So he has sort of this tendency of going to these, first it's Avakianism, and then it's, Marciite stuff. And now he made the transition in the 2010s towards Alexander Dugin, his particular kind of neo-fascism. We have 2 videos on the channel about the 2018 conference that he appeared at with Dugin and other neo-fascist figures, including heads of Marine Le Pen's fascist party in France and Wawrzyk and similar neo-fascist figures from Europe. And he's sitting at the table as a speaker, not a journalist, as he tries to spin that particular meeting. So this is sort of Maupin's whole trajectory to the right. If you catch people trying to claim that this is a socialist phenomenon, it is not. So anyway, I did a thread on this because where did it go? Yeah, he posted this on his community tab yesterday. Yesterday. So that'd be April 12, 2023. The four writers who have most greatly influenced my understanding of the world are William Z. Foster. Now, there's nothing particularly wrong with William Z. Foster that I know of. Foster was, the strange thing about this, an opponent of Earl Browder and Browderism, which was all of the sort of communism is the new Americanism that you could say has sort of Patsock overlap and those kinds of overtones, which was opportunistic at the time. And I mean, this was 80 years ago, 90 years ago now. So we've had a lot of time to learn those lessons. Foster was an opponent of Browderism back in the day. Some say that he was more loyal opposition, like it was more nominal and not militant opposition, but Foster did go on in the 40s to continue writing against revisionism and Browderism. So I don't know what the angle is there where Maupin's claiming him as his number one influence. Number two is Sam Marcy. Okay, interesting considering that Maupin uses Marcyite as a slur, so strange that it's in the number two slot. Number three, Lyndon LaRouche, Lynn Marcus, and then Nelson Peary, who is a little known figure, but could be considered anti-revisionist. So I don't know, did he pick these names out of a hat or what? But again, that all of that boiled down to LaRouche in the end. It's just not even. How do you claim a person like that as one of your major influences? So that's the question. And I had another. Oh, was it here? So yeah. Anyway, I did a thread about this. Lyndon LaRouche was a fascist or constitutional traditionalist who tried to destroy the USA's left problem from within, disrupting and physically attacking left orgs. This was known as Operation Mop-Up. Muppet used to know this, that link to that article. Also just Marcy in the number two slot, okay. And then the interview that I just mentioned there, him talking about the need to win people away from the left. And then some more screenshots from last year, in case you're thinking that Muppet views LaRouche as just some purely theoretical influence. Here's a 2022 post in which he seemed to threaten violence against today's left, saying that a, quote, mop-up sounds more appealing to me each day. That was posted last year. Again, Operation Mop-Up, that was when LaRouche's people attacked CPUSA and Socialist Workers' Party and other organization members with batons and chains and different things. It was pretty serious. So anyway, continuing through this, I think I just made one other point here. Yeah, anyway, there's the Maupin archives at Maupin AFA with examples of Maupin using Marcyite as a slur. Used it once on Twitter and about 13 times on CPI, his organization. And, there's screenshots of that article, and there was somebody else, Anthony, asking, begs the question on how he flipped. I believe that Maupin belongs to that American tradition of small sect communist parties that become cults over time, those people handing out newspapers looking crazy as fuck during protests, etc. We need an expose on Maupin from the Workers' World Party people. And I believe Maupin Archives has all that stuff documented. So I said, good question. Coming back to that 2009 article, me, personally, in 2009, I was trying to dig my way out of the libertarian or LOLbertarian dominated anti-war movement and other opportunistic things that my well-meaning but very naive back then self got into. Maupin, on the other hand, started out from a basis of, being pretty well educated in socialism, and then went the complete opposite direction, went into being a conscious participant in neo-fascist conferences alongside Alexander Dugin. For me, after, 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq in the early 2000s, all the really alarming, disturbing things that were happening under Bush and Cheney, I desperately tried to sort of throw myself into the struggle. There wasn't a lot of left stuff. Keep in mind, social media back in 03, 04 was just not what it is today at all. Most of these sites didn't even exist at all. YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, etc. just literally didn't exist. And so, it was like I just got involved with what I could get involved with. A lot of libertarians getting in your face in the 2000s. And here's me, well meaning, but trying to, get involved and winding up, tangled up in a lot of bizarre right wing shit that we were talking about fascism denialism in yesterday's stream, number 93. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I didn't realize that these kind of like, hardcore right wing things still existed. I hadn't really encountered it so much. At least I didn't think, during my life. And come to find out, it was all alive and well in the underground and starting to make its return, especially through the internet, as neoliberalism ramped up and the capitalist class needed to bring these people back out of the woodwork to defend their system as it became more and more unjust and unequal. In other words, for somebody trying to get out there and become part of the left, it was a lot easier if you weren't really, really careful and know what you were doing. It's a lot easier to become a fascist than it was to become a communist. I don't know today where exactly that stands, but part of what we're trying to do here at the channel is contribute to efforts to make it become easier when you become politically aware to become a communist than it is to become a fascist. If we can make it easier to become a communist than it is to become a fascist, that would be great. Because, again, I speak from experience. This was before the whole social media, like alt-right pipeline, just out there on like the old internet, looking up political stuff. It was like all right-wing, because the USA is a factory of fascism. USA socialization creates fascists more than it does anything else. And then it's underground too. It's reflected in there as well. The anti-communism has seeped into every level. And so you go out there looking for, quote, alternative views, and you just wind up becoming a fascist. And if you're not, it doesn't always wear swastika armbands. And if you're not wise to that, and if you don't know what's going on, you can end up in this, libertarian, contrarian grifter space, swallowing down far-right talking points. And that's one of the reasons that I do come out so hard against this and things like Revolutionary Blackout and now Jimmy Dore, especially is sort of post-2017, post-TYT far-right turn. It's because it's so easy for people to be like, hey, I don't like what's going on in the sort of mainstream. I don't like Joe Biden. I don't like George W. Bush. I don't like Obama. Yeah, okay, it's, very sensible not to like that. But then you go looking for alternative views and you wind up with a cure worse than the disease. You wind up with libertarianism, which is just more neoliberalism, but it's trying to sell itself as revolutionary when it is in fact counter-revolutionary. It's literally more of the same, or perhaps even worse. And I come down hard on that because I went out in the 2000s trying to learn, what does it mean to be anti-war? What does it mean to be working for a better society? And I heard from about 15,000 fascists before I heard from like any communists. And that's a situation that we need to change. I think that it's gotten better since 2008, Occupy, the 2010s. Anyway, this is why we do what we do here, because it has been historically way too easy to go far right than it is to go far left. But like I said, I'm annoyed and angry at the years that I wasted trying to get educated, struggling, and winding up tangled up with libertarians and all that kind of stuff. Muppet, on the other hand, literally started out in that direction and then went right wing. So what did it? Was it the money? Like, what happened? Anyway, valid thread. But then I posted that and it started getting some views. And I went off and I did some other things. And then I went to upload my stream to YouTube. And I saw that there was a community strike. So I had speculated, was this Mop-In? I'm going to take this off the screen. Was this Mop-In? Because the last time I got a community strike, it was when I was criticizing Jimmy Dore. And, the community strike was completely bogus. But I figured that the Dore people had sort of mass reported it. So knowing that Mop-In kind of has a history of stalking channels that criticize him, including even small channels, And by small channels, I don't mean S4A is getting a little bigger. You know, we're in the 5 digits now. But I mean, even stalking like channels under 1,000 people, under 1,000 subscribers who were criticizing him. You know, I thought it wasn't. I was like, here's an interesting coincidence. I haven't said anything about Caleb Maupin in a long time, and then I get a fucking community strike like right after. Well, it turns out somebody in the Twitch chat copped to it, fucking admitted it. Unreal. Somebody I kicked out of the chat because they were pissing everyone off. I even told them I would let them back in at the end of the day. That wasn't good enough. They had to falsely report the channel. So, Konnichiwa, if you're listening, fuck you. Everyone does not want you to come back. Really. There's no excuse for that kind of behavior. I don't even know this person. They literally showed up like last week. But yeah, you don't have a right to be in the comments. You can listen. That's why we post this stuff online. But nobody has to listen to your fucking garbage. You do not have that right. All right, anyway, the appeal was accepted by YouTube, so we're back in business. And credit to Maupin. That doesn't seem to have been a Maupin-related event. It just seemed like an interesting coincidence, but it is what it is. Anyway, all of that out of the way, let's get into today's chat, and then we'll get into other stuff. Who's ready to complain about Bernie? Yeah, so I basically used that as like the headline, and the thumbnail image was the Bernie Sanders book yesterday. It's okay to be angry about capitalism, or as Bernie writes, literally never mentions capitalism by itself in the book from what I saw. It's always uber capitalism. It's just, oh, we have too much capitalism. Capitalism with ride-sharing characteristics. But yeah, the cover says it's okay to be angry about capitalism, but then he literally never talks about capitalism. It's just uber capitalism, or like, I mean, he never really defines that, but we can take it to mean neoliberal capitalism, like social democracy, regulated capitalism is just fine, but it's, you know, uber capitalism. That's the problem. Yeah, I thought I was going to go into more detail on the Bernie book. I was honestly so repulsed by what I was reading, doing the whole like let's win over Trump voters thesis and stuff. Oh my fucking God. Like, it was worse than I expected. I wound up dropping it. So apologies for people, including me, who were expecting a longer treatment of the Bernie book. It was disgusting. I couldn't read it. Like, I was really revolted by that. So anyway, I thought we were going to dig deeper into the Bernie book, and it was just gross. So I stopped. But all right, what else do we have? Hello to everybody in the chat. My second to last day at work today, regular who comes in on his shift for UPS dropped by. Gave him all his shit for free today, even though he usually gets it at a massive discount anyway. And I referred him to this channel and recommended Wage, Labor, and Capital. Thanks. I mean, you know, thank you for spreading the word. Helps, you know, engage people in the discussion. And the more people involved in that, the more sort of I learn about making this channel better and more of what it needs to be. So I do take feedback seriously. So thank you for that. But also, yeah, I mean, thanks generally. We're trying to put out resources for a movement that might be able to get something done in this country within the next, I don't know, five or so years. We're hoping by 2030 that we'll have made it, you know, us and other channels and organizations doing things like this, you know, encouraging people and educating people with broad agitation and education. Again, trying to make it easier to become a communist than it is to become a fascist, which has been the norm. I mean, that it's easy to become a fascist for far too long in the USA. The union I'm in might be going on strike here in a few weeks, maybe sooner. Company isn't offering a fair contract, so we got to show them what's up. Solidarity, and let us know how it goes. Not the whole union, just the people in the company I'm in. Trade unions are so weird. Yeah, so we have a number of audiobooks on the channel from Eugene Debs, U.S. socialist and U.S. Bolshevik, who also was a co-founder of the IWW, Radical Revolutionary Labor Union. And he wrote about the need for the labor movement back in 1905, almost 120 years ago, to get away from trade union organizing. It was already outdated, and switch to industrial unionism instead. It's a better, stronger form of labor organizing. Now, it gets complicated because after World War II, during McCarthyism, the Second Red Scare, the Taft-Hartley Act was a major anti-labor piece of legislation that was passed then, and it kind of effectively outlawed a lot of the more effective practices of industrial unionism. Still, like the union movement basically started out illegal, and that things are illegal does not mean that we can't still do them. They made them illegal because they work, and when enough people get involved in this movement again, we, the workers, will take what is rightfully ours, whether or not the capitalists say that it's illegal to form that kind of labor union or not. But it does take numbers to push through that. But anyway, yeah, Debs talking against trade unionism back in the 1905 era. It was already outdated by that time. Why are we still using trade unionism, organizing on the basis of trade rather than industry in 2023? It boggles the mind. Let's see. Any talk on that Pentagon leak and now FBI arrest? I have no idea. Yeah, I saw the thing that it's suspect because it got a lot of mainstream attention. I don't know. At this point, it's like, what do you need to know? Are you still supporting the U.S. military? For fuck's sake. People get caught up in a lot of these, like, intrigues. There's a certain point where you can just be done looking at evidence. You know what I mean? When you've seen substantial and conclusive evidence that leads you to your political position, there comes a certain point where you're almost wasting your time getting involved with the details, fiddly details beyond that. Don't support the U.S. military-industrial complex. That should be, the answer to that should be, I don't support it on either side of that. So there's a certain extent where this becomes fodder for the sort of, podcaster grifter circuit to just sort of spin content off of. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure it makes a huge difference either way. If anyone has been paying attention at all for a while, I don't know. I'm not sure how much it exactly adds, but I don't know all the details either, so I want to qualify it with that. Well, yeah, technically that person could just be trying to take credit for that attack on the channel. I don't know. Like I said, it's the last community strike I got was literally like 2 years ago, so they're very infrequent. Somebody had to be big mad to do that. There's 7 billion people in the world, and the majority of the posters on the internet are right-wing bots. Block them and never look back. Yeah, again, once in a while, like rarely, I will block somebody that it's just a genuine sort of misunderstanding or disagreement. But again, if I block you on Twitter or something, just let it go. Don't start screeching about it, like with the screenshot. This person blocked me, blah, blah, blah. Because the alternative, and I'm saying this seriously, the alternative to me blocking you is getting into like a gigantic argument with you. I block now because it's just a waste of both of our time. And a lot of these people have like 150 followers. I'm not out to like drag you, but if we kept talking, I would end up doing that. It's just let it go, man. Like, let it go. Some of the Lysenko was right people were doing that the other day. I'm just like, this is not a fight you want to have, honestly. By the way, we were talking about the Lysenko stuff in the last thread. Lysenko was not right. And no, it wasn't just epigenetics. He was completely wrong about a lot of stuff. And, somebody gave me a pamphlet called Lysenko Was Right. And it's from like 1950, prior to even like the discovery of DNA. And it's just wild to read these pamphlets of people sneeringly talking about gene theory. And anyway, it's just amazing. It got very politicized. Nazi eugenics, it was sort of got politicized to the point where it was like, oh, if you believe in like genes and you don't believe in Lysenkoism, then you're like a Nazi eugenicist. Well, no, modern genetics, including epigenetics. So epigenetics are factors that influence gene expression, I guess we could say, the shorthand. Even modern epigenetics that can influence the sort of regulation, turning on and off of genes, that's based on Mendelian genetics and other, it's not Lysenkoism. And so even if you want to say like, oh, Lysenko is the father of epigenetics, no, that's not true. Some of his theories seem to have some things in common with epigenetics, but his findings were not, or his theories were not experimentally verifiable. In fact, the opposite. And when epigenetics did come around, it was not on the basis that he was saying. So it's time to abandon that. However, I did find some interesting resources because I was asking for books and articles about why did Lysenkoism get so big. It's currently trying to make a comeback in far-right Russia today, which should not exactly be a ringing endorsement. But if you see people pushing Lysenkoism, please try to stop them. They're thinking very, very uncritically about the USSR, let's put it that way. You can defend the USSR greatly and also say that, it was the first proletarian revolution. Not everything that they did was stellar. Science and biology were also in completely different positions. And they were doing this running socialism on a national scale thing for the first time. They defended it, they constructed socialism, but again, this was literally the first attempt at it. There was not a lot of data. They were pioneering and trailblazing, and not everything that they did was sheer perfection, So you don't have to uncritically defend every single thing, particularly the stuff that has been completely debunked. Mistakes were made. And right now, we're still just learning how to talk about communism in the United States, for example, to try to build it into a movement. And we need to sort out stuff like this now while the movement is still small and relatively private. Because by the time it gets bigger and goes public, we need to have sorted all this fucking Lysenko was right and all of the analogs and equivalents of that. We need to have already gotten that sorted. So we do need to engage in that discourse, but just get real, people. Like, there's critical thinking involved here. It's not just as simple as like, everything Stalin touched turned to gold. He did great work in preserving the USSR, but like we also need to learn from the mistakes, or that's not scientific to just like hand wave all that. Anyway, my manager told us today that the whole facility is no longer requiring us to wear masks. I'm literally the only one wearing a mask, and I'm freaking out. Not to do myself, but it's in the medical system. What the fuck is going on? This is how scientific and how public health and evidence informed the U.S. medical system is. They will acknowledge the severity of COVID. They will acknowledge that it's airborne. They will acknowledge that it harms the immune system. They will acknowledge it causes brain damage. But then, as soon as quarterly profits and disturbing, quote, business as usual and people's sense of, quote, normalcy, as soon as any sense of social disturbance comes in, they drop the science. So they'll say it with words, but when it comes to actually making changes in society that are reflective of actually, what would be best practices and what the evidence indicates, that's where it's not happening. They will tell you to get a vaccine. Okay, great. No argument there. They'll tell you to take Paxlovid if you're in the age group where that's going to help you. Okay, great. No argument there. But again, what about the masks, the testing, everything else? Masks, we could have a national N95 mask mandate. We need to bring back PCR testing, ventilation and filtration. The school situation, schools have been a major source of COVID infection spread. We need to do something with that as well. And again, they're hand-waving it all so that business as usual, capitalism, can go on. That's basically it in a nutshell. Oh yeah, so I shared with some people a link to the Ben Norton deleted tweets archive. Ben Norton used to support the FSA fundamentalist fascist goons, shaking my head. There's a lot of interesting stuff there. I mean, there was some good stuff that got deleted. I don't know. These people who are kind of independent journalist mercenaries, it's not to say that everything that they do is incorrect, but, it's hard to make a living as a journalist. And when that's what you're out there doing and you're just publishing content day in and day out, and your sources are, various sort of government intelligence agencies sometimes and things, I don't know. That's not something that I get real close to. I take like a salt shaker full of salt anytime I read stuff like that, which is not that frequent in the first place. Because it is people flipping, first they're getting funded by this outlet, and so they're using this set of talking points for 2 years. Then they're getting funded by this outlet, and then they're using like contradictory talking points for a few years. And while people can and do grow and improve with their politics, that's not always what's happening. Sometimes it is being dictated by the money. So yeah, there are some very dedicated journalists doing real work. There's other people who kind of seem to operate on this sort of cutting edge mercenary status, and I don't know, like I said, I don't really trust it. It's not to say I never read it, but it's big boulder of salt taken with that. The guy literally came in and was like, "Hey, I just reported your channel. Let's be friends." Who the hell knows what's going on there, but yeah. Hope everyone is masked. We must protect the disabled. That's true, and it's really not just previously disabled people who are at risk. We're literally all at risk. But yes, some people have higher risk than others. But the baseline risk from COVID is very high. So, and then some people it's extremely high. But it's even for the average, person that doesn't think of themselves as disabled, the risk from COVID is very, very high. Nashville's been in the international news again for being disgustingly reactionary. Are you talking about the kicking the guy out of the legislature, or what was that? By the way, I can't. It's just trying to keep up with all the stories. Your just brain melts. Speaking of, we were talking yesterday about the East Palestine soil cleanup after the bomb train. How the truck overturned and spilled like tens of thousands of pounds of contaminated soil. How does that even happen? There was another thing. I don't know if it was in Texas or where, but there was a CAFO, big factory farm with cattle. There were like 15 or 18,000 cows that were killed in a massive explosion at this huge facility. By the way, if you don't hear a lot about the horrors of CAFOs and factory farms, that's CAFO, look up what ag-gag laws are, agricultural gag laws. It's literally illegal to report on conditions within factory farms. So horrific are the things happening. Like, people would demand a stop to these things if they knew all of the harm associated with it. The wanton, hellish cruelty that the animals undergo, the pollution from the runoff, the effects are wide ranging. The breeding of disease among all those animals who are kept in unnaturally close quarters, horrendous stuff. So they've literally made laws to prevent journalists from dealing with it properly. And it's like laws against sort of whistleblower leaks and different things. Yeah, if anything, we need a higher COVID emergency level than before. I agree. Like right now, the wastewater curve has come down, but it kind of does that every spring. And it does that right before it goes into the plateau. We had a massive plateau of COVID. When do you stream? Is there a set schedule? Yeah, it's usually Wednesdays, 1 Pacific, 4 Eastern. That's PM. And in global mean time, or Greenwich Mean Time, that would be 8 p.m. I believe. I looked it up again. For some reason, read something. I thought it was midnight. No, 8 p.m. So anyway, I meant to post that in the post, and I didn't today. But yeah. It's on the community tab. I also, I announce it there. I announce it on Patreon. Usually announce it on Mastodon. Always announce it on Twitter as well. Maupin is like a straw man of Tanky. He takes right-wing tropes and coats them in red paint to sell. Yeah, again, this is fascism. Counter-revolutionary content, some revolutionary aesthetics. Maupin, Peter Coffin, and Infracell in permanent competition to be the most ridiculous person you've ever seen. Truly, LaRouche isn't sending his best. Or is he? Yeah, I mean these people are by and large irrelevant at this point. I covered it because actually Flashy sent me the screenshot of Maupin's community post where he's just admitting like, oh yeah, Lyndon LaRouche, guy I like called a fascist, and listed everything wrong with him. So I was clearly aware of it in detail. Is the number three most influential author on my understanding of the world. That's ridiculous. So yeah. If those are the worst, what are the best? Oh boy. Also, the nickname the Spanky Tanky, Maupin can never outlive that. Though one of the people I think criticizing him went by the Yankee Tanky. So you got the Yankee Tanky and the Spanky Tanky. Together they make quite a team. Or used to. I don't know. Crazy stuff. But this is what people are like. Why don't you endorse organizations? Fucking that's why. When we get the big mass party that's not having sex cult scandals, yeah, and that has actual ties to the masses and is coordinating effective general strikes, y'all think about endorsing it. In the meantime, get involved in your left, sort the shit out. If we get a party out of it, I'm happy to look at it. In the meantime, I've heard crazy stories, whether it's sexual assault, all kinds of stuff coming out of organizations. If you think that there's an organization that really speaks to you and you want to join, go for it. I'm not going to stand in your way unless I know something specific about it. But yeah, I also don't want that on my hands at this point when I don't think we have the party we need. So, like I said, investigate your local left network, get to know people, see what's going on, and try to find other communists. And maybe you can network and find enough actual communists, whether it's out of the left wing of DSA or out of a tenants union that maybe the Green Party's doing support for, whatever. Network with them, make connections, and then who knows, maybe a few years from now, there will be a new party of, all the more left-leaning people who got involved. I don't know. As far as, Marxist clubs and things like that, as I've said, you might check out Politsturm. They're international and based in Russia, Ukraine, Armenia, United States, and other places. You can study Marxism with other people. I like their content, and they have actual clubs and study groups forming. So, that would be about it. I haven't seen anything bad out of them, and I like their content, but so otherwise, people need to get to know their left and see what's going on. Yeah, so people are asking about Maupin being an Avakian, and so I think I have the thing here on that. This is, again, courtesy of the, I think it's this tweet. Yeah, so Maupin Archives posted this is a screenshot from former comrades. This is 2015. My former Cleveland friend Caleb Maupin has taken another horrible step in his political devolution from Avakian to Marcy to Khomeini, Assad, Putin. He has also released a book called Satan at the Fountainhead, The Israel Lobby and the Financial Crisis. I said, Mop-Up was an Avakian? Yeah, he admitted to it both on YouTube and Twitter. In his YouTube video, he said Avakians were more energetic than Marxists, and he wanted to copy their style. Now, by the way, this was another factor that led to me against my better judgment, like working with libertarians for probably longer than I should have in the noughts. What do they call them? The noughties? That's the worst fucking thing. In the 2000s. Libertarians were loud in your face. They sounded angry and like they wanted to do something. And unfortunately, turned out to be, revolutionary energy, counter-revolutionary content. So this is the thing. You can't just go off of energy. That's not really it. I mean, whatever we build, it must have the energy of the masses behind it, but not the sort of petty bourgeois rage that is embodied in, the libertarians or some of these other kind of things. All right. By the way, people interested in what's with the Avakian thing, there's a whole book on foreignlanguages.press against Avakianism if you want to read it. It's kind of long. Mop and try not to join weird cults challenge. Difficulty impossible. Caleb was in Workers' World and learned the history of socialism from the Marcyites. Yeah, I mean, I can kind of understand why Marcy is number two. It's still just like a weird, like, you know what I mean? Lenin's not on the list, like nothing. It's, I don't know, just odd. Maupin's handlers gave him the names. I can't. Maupin archives. This is as important as the Soviet archives. Nice. Don't meme too close to the sun. Somebody who's getting a little too edgy in the comments. I'm lucky I didn't get influenced by U.S. opportunism. I'll tell you, it's fucking everywhere. That's really why I'm out here now, so that so that the path towards getting, a communist education is shorter and easier. And again, trying to make it easier to become a communist than a fascist, because when I started, it was very, very hard. Off-topic question, how likely do you think it is for China to adopt a more centralized economic model? I don't know exactly what you mean. Somebody's saying I wouldn't put money on it. So there was actually, I don't even want to go down that road today. Welcome to the West. It's PSYOPs all the way down. When I argue with any Westerner, it really hurts how liberal they think. I'm telling you, it's fucking hard to get out of it. It really is. So when you see somebody, again, like Maupin, who back in '09 was already more on the right track and then like literally went in the exact wrong direction, it's like how much money was involved. Who the fuck knows? But yeah, no, we need to do this thing right, and that's my commitment at this point. I really appreciate, speaking of, let us thank the patrons, the people who help. I'm not independently wealthy, so people helping to support financially so that I can spend the time. I would be making some kind of content without any financial support, but I definitely would not be able to spend this much time on it. So I really appreciate that. Patreon.com/socialismforall. A lot of people ask, can I make a one-time contribution? The answer is yes. Patreon will bill you when you sign up. So all you got to do is sign up, let it bill you, then cancel, and it won't recur. It will bill you when you sign up, and then again on the first of the month. All right, so you can make a one-time contribution if you want. Now, again, the recurring contributions, and you can see names in green have been supporting for over 2 years. We're getting close to a blue name, which would be 3 years, but we're not quite there yet. Yellow names are over a year. White names are under a year. But there's a lot of long-term support. I really appreciate that. And yes, you keep your name color, even if you bounce from, 20 to 10, 2 to 5. We just go on the length of support time. So it doesn't matter if you downgrade. I really appreciate it. Also, I want to give a special thanks. I say this every time, but to the people who show up for the Twitch streams, as well as regular contributors and commenters on Twitter in the DMs, on Reddit in the DMs, on YouTube in the comments. Maybe I said that already. But I could do this without you, but not as well, and probably not for as long. And we wouldn't get the diversity of content that we get and the diversity of views, and it just makes it that much more intelligent and interesting. So hats off. I really appreciate everybody who does show up, and whether, whatever role it is, whether you just send links, you're a mod, you're a regular commenter, it all helps to make this channel better and helps to, people have mentioned how learning socialism rather than, getting out of the SOCDEM space kind of improves their mental health to get some revolutionary optimism and connect with the, 175-year history of the international communist movement. It's helped my mental health too. And all of your reading recommendations and all of the various, ideological and factual corrections that people have made, I take it seriously. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to become more intelligent. And this is a shared project, so that improved intelligences for everyone who gets involved with this. And again, just a lot of appreciation there. All right. Another comment. I was growing up in a very ethno-fascist environment, and we had civil war in 2001, and pretty much everyone was bitter and hateful. In my adulthood, I started as Titoist, mainly for the good old days, sympathizing and feeling nostalgia for something I never experienced. But my parents did, and they loved it, until I started educating myself. And so that's a person from Macedonia. Yeah, I remember when that was going on, and I knew people who were, like, speaking of just the U.S. being such a haven and a magnet for fascists. Like, I knew people who were trying to cover up what was going on, you know, and I knew nothing at the time. And, God, it's just like everywhere you turn in the U.S., you're likely, if you're going about it casually, you're likely to pick up just the absolute worst right-wing talking points. And it's something that has taken me to this point in my life to really effectively, try to get it out of my head and replace it with something better. Fuck Bernie, there you go. Gaddafi official has a video about how Uber is a crime ring. Interesting. It's the first time hearing of that. FYI, the Discord invite in the pinned message doesn't work. Oh, that's to somebody else. Gotcha. Okay. That's for Shakespeare's Discord. Watch the video, How to Fire Your Boss, on the S4A channel. It immensely helped me with my own union struggles, to the guy talking about the union stuff. Yeah, we have some how-to union organizing pamphlets on the channel in audiobook form. Listen to them. That's what I put them up there for. How to Fire Your Boss is one of them. There's also some IWW organizing manuals, which are very DIY. You know, some of the unions, the bigger unions, it's not very DIY. It's not necessarily sort of like guerrilla working class espionage against employers. It's more like, you know, teams of lawyers are involved in things. But some of those, like, they kind of border more on, like, ANCOM or, like, anarcho-syndicalist. It's more DIY stuff. But in a small or medium workplace union campaign, it's entirely appropriate. I wouldn't necessarily, I would take those techniques of union workplace organizing that are really helpful for sizing up your workplace and how secretive you have to be and how to go about it. And, anyway, there's a lot of really specifics. I would not, though, keep the anarchist or anarchist-flavored politics that are often associated with an IWW or something like that, which is, that you don't need a proletarian party, and it's sort of, quote, anti-vanguardist, although anarchists ironically do sort of constitute a portion of the vanguard, although they reject some of the conclusions of that. But anyway, yeah, there's some really useful stuff there. Again, I'm really just, I was going to say waiting for, but not just passively waiting for. I'm trying to actively help the U.S. left, as are we all, I think, try to outgrow its petty bourgeois individualism that gets socialized into you in this country. And I think anarchism is one of the manifestations of that. People will have, and I didn't understand that first, because I remember people on Facebook saying, well, and this was before I had read a lot of Marxist work about anarchism, explaining how anarchism was a petty bourgeois ideology. And I'm like, well, everyone I know that's anarchist is actually proletarian. What's meant by that is that you can be proletarian in your actual class status, but it's a petty bourgeois ideology. So you got to lose that petty bourgeois false consciousness mentality and come over to the Marxism. So, all right. It'll be very interesting to see how the French protests will progress, which they are ongoing. Are they going to stop at the rollback of this pension plan, or will they continue maybe into something more revolutionary? And yeah, this is the thing. Even having a labor movement strong enough to oppose worsening of domestic conditions, that's a major achievement. Don't shit on that. Don't shit on that. But then step 2 is overcoming the social chauvinism that stops at better domestic conditions. You got to tie it in with the international revolutionary proletarian solidarity. Yeah, you're not going to be in a position to have effective revolutionary, internationalist unionism if you don't have the unionism in the first place. So it is about both improving conditions and defending conditions domestically, but you also need the international revolutionary component as well. Union actions should not just be in defense of the workers' own conditions. They should be tied in with a broader international political struggle for socialism. But again, you need the numbers there in the first place in order to make that second part meaningful. So you just can't stop at it. Anyway, continuing, I wonder how the ruling class will respond to the French protests, because the working class there are far better organized in comparison to other countries. Even the petty bourgeoisie joins forces with the working class sometimes. Although that is something in France I think you have to be careful of, because the yellow vests, I think there's a lot of Le Pen people in that. So it's the far right as well trying to insinuate themselves in there in much the same way that the libertarians do here. Oh, you have an anti-war rally? I'm anti-war. Shut up, nerd. You're for fucking unregulated capitalism. Get out of here. You're not anti-war. So, yeah, hopefully France gets all of that sorted. Speaking of, I actually have two videos from the French protests. Here's content warning, police violence. I think this is about 20 seconds of the riot cops in France, I guess taking a page out of the US cops book and beating on people. The second video is storming the headquarters of Louis Vuitton, which I think is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, French brand. Anyway, let's watch. So yeah, shit's getting serious. That's really bad. Stormtroopers on patrol there. But, likewise, there's so many videos of them being lit on fire and running away and all that. So anyway, but that was the cops having sort of a moment that went in their favor. Now, on the other hand, here are protesters storming the Louis Vuitton headquarters.
Ah, mais on se passe pas pour prendre des cotons au ventre ou pas? Allez.
All right, so there you go. Some clips there of the French doing what they do. Yeah, and please learn from 1968. Let's go all the way this time. Wait, there are still Lysenkoists? That's bananas. Yeah, again, they're sort of trying to revive it in as part of USSR nostalgia in Russia, but being that it's being resurrected by the right wing, which is what's ruling Russia, they're trying to revive all of the things that are sort of the most twisted about the USSR, so that people don't get any ideas about doing revolution. I looked up what happened to Paul Wellstone, senator in the U.S., and yep, he was probably assassinated. He sounded pretty good in his speaking, too. But hey, we're going to totally transform the Democratic Party, right? No, you're not. That's not how it works. For some reason, I started reading yesterday about Lysenko. There are some nutjob conspiracy theories on Wikipedia, like his being responsible for the famines in China, even though his agricultural methods weren't really that crazy. No, they were pretty bad, and actually, even in the USSR, while local and regional officials were publicly praising his methods, they were in practice phasing them out because they did not fucking work. So no. This actually, I think, was one of the factors leading to the let a thousand flowers bloom. In other words, let the scientists and artists do their thing without so much political interference. Now, I did find a good article on Lysenkoism that said it's a mistake just to boil it down to politics interfering with science, although that is a component of it. Long article, though, and I didn't have... What was it called? I think it was Getting Started with Lysenkoism. Was that the name of it? Yeah, Robert Young, Getting Started on Lysenkoism from 1978. Haven't had a chance to go through it yet. But no, I don't think those are actually nutjob conspiracy theories so much. Good point. If you believe in genes, you're a Nazi, say the guys that believe in physiognomy and alpha males. What else needs to be said? You know, literally, it's the Two Holes gang that is like anti-gene theory, so there you go. The Dream, evidence-based policy. You can't inoculate the population against alcohol poisoning. I don't really know what that is in reference to at all. However, I am overdue to start on the COVID articles, and I have one about alcohol, actually. So why don't we just dig in there? Alcohol, where did I put it? I have so many articles in this thing. Long COVID might ruin booze for you. So first of all, let me say I am dramatically anti-alcohol. I think alcohol abuse is one of the most destructive things that a person can go through. Physically, emotionally, socially, can destroy family systems. It's a horrific thing. And so, you know, it's just alcohol is normalized to a degree that it just shouldn't be. But anyway, long COVID might ruin booze for you. So quoting somebody, I just really, really struggled if I had one drink. I would wake up so hungover, terrible headaches, super tired. It was so bizarre. I think this was actually on BuzzFeed, Katie Camero. So let's read a little bit of this. These are the wide-ranging effects of COVID. So before she came down with COVID in March 2020, Rebecca Stein was able to enjoy a handful of alcoholic drinks a week. She assumed nothing had changed after her mild infection. So and again, COVID, even if it seems mild up front, there's nothing mild about COVID. It can seem mild up front. You don't get the big pneumonia and all that stuff. But just because you don't get that doesn't mean that it's not doing dramatically terrible things. Here's one example, actually, just before we go back to this. So we've covered this multiple times. This has been known for over a year now. Even a mild case of COVID can shrink your brain the same as aging 10 years, study shows. So yeah, quote, mild COVID, get it out of your head. There's a difference between the acute phase of COVID and then the long-term damage that the virus can cause. Doesn't do it in everyone, but yeah. She assumed that nothing had changed, so when she saw her husband holding an enticing glass of whiskey one night, she took a tiny sip. Within a minute, severe chest pain kicked in, and Stein, 30 years old, became so drunk it felt like she had downed several drinks at once. The next day was worse, but it wasn't your average hangover. She had an irregular heartbeat, chest pain, cough, sore throat, headache, and stuffy nose. It was, quote, basically COVID relapse, said Stein, who's also been dealing with other long COVID symptoms, including shortness of breath, regular fevers, full body aches, and exhaustion. So, by the way, long COVID, what causes it? We're not entirely sure, but there seem to be about half a dozen factors that come up over and over again. One is persistent infection. In other words, your body fights off 90 or 95% of the virus, but then a certain low amount of it lingers in the body and continues to do damage. Another is inflammation, ongoing inflammation. Causes all kinds of problems. Inflammation can be a normal, healthy part of your healing response, but when you get it chronically, it contributes to tissue degeneration and aging, just the deterioration of systems that you need to be intact. And the COVID spike protein, it's not just that it triggers your body's response in trying to get rid of it. We covered a story on this a while ago. The COVID spike protein actually acts as a skeleton key. It can go directly to some of your pro-inflammatory cells and activate them directly, not as part of a healing response to COVID. It just sets them off. So it basically just runs through the arcade, putting quarters in all the machines. So anyway, COVID is a profoundly awful thing. Another thing is COVID seems to reactivate latent viruses that are in the body dormant, because once you catch something, it's not necessarily totally done away with and excreted. Some of it hangs around, but it doesn't do anything. COVID seems to reactivate some of it. Some of the long COVID symptoms seem to be tied to your gut microbiome being dysregulated. So your gut microbiome, you have pounds of bacteria and microorganisms living in your intestines and on your skin and other places, but especially in your inner digestive system. And COVID, the gut can be a reservoir of COVID, and it can really mess up your gut microbiome. We saw studies we've covered here on the channel a couple of months ago about mice, germ-free mice, experimentally being infected with COVID, and then, other mice being infected with COVID, samples of their gut microbiome being transplanted into germ-free mice, and then the germ-free mice developing symptoms of long COVID. So that would seem to bear out the hypothesis of effects of microbiome dysregulation. Because your gut microbiome, it makes serotonin, it makes neurotransmitters, it does all kinds of stuff. Very, very active. There's a concept called the enteric brain that is kind of like, in a way, your gut is like a second brain. Not as sophisticated in some ways as the brain in your head, but also very, kind of neurologically active in that way. Anyway, nearly 3 years later, Stein still cannot drink alcohol of any kind, and she isn't alone. Post-COVID alcohol intolerance has not been studied yet, so no one knows how common it actually is. But interviews with doctors, researchers, and people who are no longer able to drink alcohol suggest it's yet another mysterious symptom that could be a side effect of the viral infection. So just to remind people of how many different symptoms you can come down with COVID. This is from a study we covered a long time ago, but this is kind of like a at-a-glance diagram of long-term effects of COVID-19. Biggest is fatigue, second biggest is headache, but you've got hair loss, hearing loss, cough, chest pain and discomfort, nausea, difficulty breathing, chills, pain, weight loss, disruptions to your ability to smell, attention disorder, memory loss, anxiety, depression. It goes on and on, joint pain. So it's a really, really far-reaching thing. And how do you prevent long COVID? Mainly by preventing short COVID. You can lower your odds of long COVID by getting vaccinated and, staying, like, certain things. But the only way to lower your odds to zero of getting long COVID is by not getting short COVID, keeping the virus out of your body. Anyway, brief thing about that. That anti-Moppin account didn't like the online left article that's been going around. I didn't particularly like it either. I considered actually kind of pulling it for a stream, and I might. The one in the international mags, I had my criticisms of that as well. I thought that was not the greatest article either. But anyway, that was my impression. I have not read it word for word. I read about half of it and stopped because I was put off by it. But yeah, actually that account did mention I've heard some of their criticisms of that article, and yeah, it's a lot more complicated than that article makes it out to be. Glad my name is up there. Glad I could support. Thinking about moving my Deprogram subscription money over to S4A. Their last episode was mega fucking cringe. They had Hassan on, and he spent 60% of the time whining about being called out for his $3 million house. So that's why I've been getting all of those comments on the Hassan video. Yeah, there's been like a number of things that people have pointed. I don't listen to the Deprogram. I'm usually busy researching stuff for the show. or doing audiobooks or something. But that's what a lot of my learning about communism time budget goes into. But there's been a number of things now that I have not liked coming out of the deprogram. So I don't know if they're having trouble keeping the quality level up over there, but it's some of it is concerning. Anyway, I was getting a bunch of really whiny comments on the Hassan criticism video that I did like last year. And yeah, indulging in bourgeois displays of wealth, like the $3 million house, like the expensive sports car. I mean, expect criticism, you know? Yeah, so he did the, oh, I guess you have to be poor to be a communist line. And apparently the deprogram guys ate it up. It was embarrassing. Yeah, that is embarrassing. They should be ashamed. That's fucking awful. So yeah. I'm nowhere near at this point. It's the only source of revenue for this channel is the Patreon, and I have public how much I'm making on it. We don't run ads, we don't do sponsorships, nothing like that. It's just like a flat monthly amount that is donated by people. I've thought many times about, if this ever got up into the multiple thousands where it's, like a month, of like what I would do with the money, and it's not really that hard of a decision, really. So, yeah, I don't really have sympathy for people who are just buying $3 million houses and stuff like that. Currently, I'm nowhere near the level where it's even a concern. Like, you know, but I've thought about, what if the day comes where it's like there's a lot of money coming in through that? Like, there's a certain amount I would keep, and then that would be that. The rest goes back because we are trying to build a movement and not just we're not just trying to build a bank account. We're not just trying to build our real estate portfolio. As much as being a Marxist gives me a headache having to deal with reactionaries, it's given me hope that I didn't have before when I was a Doomer Bernie-crat. Amen. Amen. Absolutely. Ha. We support you to prove Marx true on revolution in a developed country. Well, we're trying to make contributions towards that effort. It's going to take a lot more than this channel, but we'll do what we can. Again, broad-based agitation and education grounded in actual theory and history of the 175-year history of international communism. So I heard Hakim at one point kind of denied the Kurdish genocide. I missed that. And Ugopnik has some weird takes sometimes. He really loves Zizek, which is weird to me. Yeah, I don't know. From the way that whole thing is going, it seems to me like in a year there might be some problems, like some significant problems coming out of that show, but time will tell. I mean, I hope not. It'd be nice. You want to believe that the things that get big rapidly are going to be good, but there's not a ton of examples of that, let's put it that way. There are many people who call themselves anarchist when they're obviously Marxist. If you agree with Karl Marx and still refuse to call yourself a Marxist, I have trouble trusting you. Yeah, you hear that sometimes. And a lot of times they'll try to support it by saying things like Marx didn't believe in like statism, or Marx was actually an anarchist, or no, actually, like, anarchism is not a new thing. It was around in Marx and Engels' time. They wrote about it. They were contemporaries of Proudhon and Bakunin and so on, and like they had actual like contemporary criticisms of them. Marx and Engels were definitely not anarchists, and no, it's not compatible. Please read some fucking Marx. Like, it's anything not to read. Anarchists, please read challenge. And you can do it. We're trying to make it easy for you here on the channel. We're trying to make it easy for you. Believe me, trust me, you will get more out of being a Marxist. It's a little bit harder because you do have to do the reading and stuff, but you will get more out of it in the long term. As far as learning from 1968 in France, we know that the PCF, Parti Communiste, well, anyway, the French version of French Communist Party, revisionist Eurocom dickheads, refused to throw their weight behind the revolt in that year, even when many of the unions were already on the side of the protesters. I have been told that there is still a significant sort of Eurocom and SOCDEM and even anarchist trend within or trends within the PCF. I don't know. I'm not that close to it. But I don't know. As far as being a Eurocom, there's no more USSR to distance yourself from. So I don't know. Maybe this time they won't have that hang up. I don't know. I think another important aspect of the experience of 1968 is that, yes, it was a revolt mostly led by anarchists. They have a vanguard element, even if they don't like it. And it should be encouraged, yes, but their successes, I think, should also be applauded. I agree. I mean, we can't just naysay. We can't just, shit on things and first worlders, it's just all social chauvinism. There's social chauvinism to be combated, but, they're out there doing at least half of the things that need to be done. Let's try. There's a time where let's try to influence things in the right direction makes sense, and then there's a time where it doesn't make sense and is just opportunist and absurd. Like Joe Biden, for example. You're not gonna pull him left or whatever. People who are burning down the BlackRock or Louis Vuitton headquarters. Yeah, I mean, you can probably, have some kind of discussion within a left-wing framework with them. All right, so we're basically caught up with the chat. Let us now get into the devastating assault. Actually, I haven't even gotten into all of the stuff. All right, let's do some fun stuff just to, clear our heads for a minute here. We'll probably go for about another hour and 10 minutes or so. Getting, All right, somebody had a point. This is just grab bag stuff. Somebody named Ron Chan was talking about AI art. AI art defenders are still trying to use the tired argument of humans and AI are both influenced by previous art. Explain to me why it's somehow worse for AI to do it. Like it's some kind of gotcha. So here's a handy illustration of how human-made art being influenced by things and AI art differ. Because you're not a fucking machine. Art is meant to serve. Art is meant to come from and serve people, and AI art is just literally hoovering up the internet and then blasting out of its ass just various algorithmically recombined things. No doubt AI can be used as a tool for certain things. It is not the same. For sure. So I did like that. There is a lot of pushback coming on AI art. I'm not sure where all of that is going, but there are definitely valid criticisms of how AI is being rolled out and various things. So there was another thing here. If people remember, I guess we're getting this sort of blast of the right-wing opportunism coming out today. But so here's a screenshot of a tweet from the National Libertarian Party. So this isn't, sometimes there's particular state branches of the Libertarian Party that have a strong Twitter presence. So I think the Arizona Libertarians and I know the New Hampshire Libertarians. New Hampshire is the home of the Free State Project, where a bunch of LOLberts tried to move there to take over the state government. Some of them will be super edgy online. And people also will try to blame the Mises caucus within the Libertarian Party for being particularly awful. Look, the Libertarian Party has always been shit. It's always been crypto-fascist, and now it's losing the crypto part. That's about all I can say. So here's a tweet from the Libertarian Party, National. Critical race theory is the most widespread and culturally accepted form of racism in the world today. Yeah, that's right. Calling out racism is literally originating racism. Very big brain, have a cookie. To dispose of it, this is literally their fucking solution to everything. What's the libertarian solution to prescription drugs? Privatize it. What's the libertarian solution to education? Privatize it. Privatize it, privatize it, privatize it. That's always their solution. To dispose of critical race theory, government schools must be abolished. Are you still wanting to be in bed with the Libertarian Party? Because if so, this is what you're supporting. So, R. Johnston 815 pointed this out and said reactionary white people looking to redefine racism so that they can continue to oppress black folks. Y'all remember Rage Against the War Machine people telling me to organize with these racists, right? We sure do. It was just back in February, 2 months ago. And that was the libertarian and neo-Nazi, quote, anti-war rally. The right wing has always tried to, whether it's the John Birchers or whatever, back through the decades, they've always tried to make themselves out as anti-war and peace-loving and whatever else. They're not. This continues to today. Anyway, you remember the Rage Against the War Machine rally people telling me to organize with these racists, right? This shit right here is exactly why I said no. Good for you, R. Johnston, because that's what the Libertarian Party is all about, and don't let yourself be fooled. Finally, this is fun. We were talking yesterday about the my beer can made me trans people, like the people who were getting up in arms about Bud Light. And the thing about that here, let's somebody did a fitting tribute here, and this next song is called "They Put a Gay Flag on My Beer." Anyway, conservatives, including Kid Rock and many other people, filming themselves beating up cans of Bud Light, basically as effigies for LGBTQ people, because Bud Light did a not commercially available commemorative can with the face of a trans influencer on it. Again, not even sold in stores by my understanding, but even that was threatening enough for them. Well, now there's a response. So if you're sick and tired of, the liberals shoving it down your throat and, whatever else. We had another one here. Yeah, here it is. So Walter Masterson posting this video, which plays like an SNL sketch. I commented, whoever buys this is the biggest chump in history. Also, it sells for $30 per six-pack. It's $25 more per six-pack than Bud Light. Let's watch the video. You won't even fucking believe this.
America's been drinking beer from a company that doesn't even know which restroom to use. That's why I created Conservative Dad's ultra-right, 100% woke-free beer. As conservatives, we're constantly getting hit in the face, left and right, by the woke mind virus. But the last place...
So it used to be known as just like not being a dick to people who are slightly different from you. Now it's the woke mind virus. Also, I love the toilet flushing sound effect. Gives it that extra degree of realism.
We want it is in our beer. If you know...
Might I just say, excellent form on that throw. Can we watch that again?
Is in our beer. If you know
Wonderful.
Which bathroom
He like almost fell
you know
over.
what beer you should be drinking. Stop giving money to woke corporations that hate our values. And to the rest of you woke corporations, stay the away from our kids.
Buy yours online in 42 states at ultrarightbeer.com.
Tastes like freedom.
Fucking SNL sketch. So yeah, if your beer isn't fascist enough, which by the way, isn't Coors like a major right-wing donor? If your beer isn't fascist enough, now you can have ultra-right beer. Love how he like drenched himself in beer hitting that can. Having to take a shower to own the libs. I don't know. Anyway, this was before we get into the miserably depressing COVID stuff. A couple of fun things here. Let's just see if there's any chat off of that. When bourgeois people try to tell you that human art is no different than AI art, you should interpret that as to them there is no significant difference between you as a human and whatever AI they use to make money. Both are an expendable resource for them to make money. Good point. To give the devil his due, it's people talking about the Tea Party? What? I find libertarians. Okay, I got it. The Tea Party is a good example of how to infiltrate an existing political structure. What are you talking about? The Tea Party was an Astroturf movement put up by the Republican Party in the wake of 2008, the complete burning out of the Republican Party under Bush and Cheney. People were ready to Bush and Cheney used up every last ounce of social capital the Republican Party had, and the Republican Party needed a new face, especially in the wake of the biggest, really the first crisis of capitalism in the post-war era, 2008. So they came up with this pseudo-grassroots Astroturf. They basically took all of the super patriots and, sovereign citizens and all of the far-right absolute crackpots, and they cobbled them together into this new face of the Republican Party, which then became the birthers and, the Sarah Palin sort of supporters, and then the birthers under Trump 2012, and then they became MAGA, and they're still going. So I don't know what you're talking about, infiltrating an existing political structure. They are just the right-wing fringe of the Republican Party that had to get pulled in because the Bush-Cheney wing burned itself out and had no fucking credibility after 2009. I don't really know what you mean. I find libertarians extra infuriating because they identify the issue but refuse to see capitalism as the problem. Yeah, and no amount of being able, demonstrating the evidence to them will sway them. They are willfully ignorant and rely on irrational trains of thought. So, yeah, government-funded schools currently can be, you can get a poor education or indoctrinate you into capitalism, but the problem is not that they're fucking woke or whatever. You'll barely learn anything about left history at all. The few teachers who are actually trying to teach you something about the social history of the United States, I can't really remember getting beaten over the head with that. I had to go so far out of my way to learn about the kind of stuff we're talking about today. It took years. That's what I was talking about before. You had somebody like Maupin that's in a party in '09 and then disregards it all. Meanwhile, I was drowning in a sea of fucking people talking about, the woke mind virus didn't exist at that time, but it was kind of, comparable rhetoric. Yeah, that's just a move in the fascist playbook, co-opting left ideas and language and then stuffing them full of counter-revolutionary content. Kid Rock was basically crying while he filmed himself shooting the Bud beer cans. How is this real? So I think that guy, I didn't catch his name, but I think he's a Republican Party strategist. On a similar note to this, I saw a Black Rifle Coffee t-shirt in the wild at work today. Rolled my eyes as hard as I could get away with. Woke corporations are the non sequitur of our time. Yeah, people in the right wing seem to have a real hard time understanding that corporations just do whatever's profitable. If they can expand their market 1% or 5% by pretending to be tolerant in their PR, then they will do it. Meanwhile, they will actually keep funding far-right politicians. But yeah, conservatives will just look all day long. They're just scouring the world for things to get angry about. But then when you show them the thing they actually should be angry about and why, they will fight you tooth and nail. There's so much cognitive dissonance, and they don't want to see it. It's willful ignorance. Ultra right never felt so wrong. Love it. Everything I hate is woke. Beer, famously for children. It should already be away from your children. Yes. Saw a post from Eve 6, the alternative band today, that said, brands don't do activism, they do marketing, dummies. And it was weird to learn that Eve 6 is probably class conscious. Yeah, I've seen that from them before. They did the Heart in a Blender song, didn't they? I don't think that their music is political. I don't know. But, yeah, I think I've seen them saying, moderately class conscious things before. Ron Paul bringing up CIA coups during the 2008 primary still kills me. I know, right? Like, he's on the bleeding edge of fucking anti-CIA action. Are you kidding me? What do you think the CIA was doing the coup for? The same fucking, like, unregulated cap... Oh, no, but see, Ron Paul, it's the reactionary petty bourgeois mentality. They call large corporations, basically imperialism, they call that communism. Because to them, capitalism is only the early stage of capitalism. When it's ascendant, when, it's basically like 19th century capitalism. That's what libertarians want. They don't understand that the nature of capitalism is to consolidate over time. So by the 20th century, it had largely consolidated, and by the 21st century, it is completely consolidated. And you just can't turn back the wheel of history on that. That's literally written about in the Communist Manifesto. It is so basic. So that's what the libertarians screech about, is like, I can't just start a business and get rich exploiting people anymore. Yeah, because people already got there first. We're no longer in that stage of history. And you can't just recreate it. And literally everything they want to do, just totally deregulating stuff. Yes, would it make it easier to start a business up? Technically, but the only reason it would make it easier to start a business up is because it would lower the bar to where it's completely unsafe for the community at all. People like starting up nuclear reactors in their backyards because there are no fucking regulations. So, anyway. No, but I mean, on a more real note, it's letting people pollute. Companies just never having to pay fines, not having any formalized workers' rights. And I've talked to libertarians before that are like, well, I don't care if, workers form a union. I just don't like it when the government backs their legal right to do so. Okay, but literally all of the... first of all, they don't even really do that in a way that skews towards the workers. U.S. labor law is severely skewed towards employers. Otherwise, we would have had a socialist revolution by now. And the U.S. labor union density wouldn't have been dropping for the last, 5 decades. But that aside... yeah, it's just like they don't want any workers' rights or environmental rights or animal rights or anything codified into law. They just want people to, hash it out in the courts or hash it out in, strikes where people are, shooting at each other. And, guess what? If it really did go that way, you'd probably also have a socialist revolution. So be careful what you'll wish for. It's a massive contradiction. Again, the irrationality component of fascism always comes up when you start trying to pick apart libertarian logic. Logic, in quotes. It's funny. I grew up in the South and had a teacher spend 2 full days, quote, teaching us on how the Nazis are actually socialist and anti-fascists are fascist. If anything, school here is already anti-quote woke. Well, this goes back into the libertarian right-wing fascist trope of it's never right-wing enough. No matter what the problem is, the solution is it's not right-wing enough. That's why we had the problem. So even when the problem is clearly it's too right-wing, they want it to be more. Somehow more of the problem is going to fix the problem. That's basically what you get into in the end with libertarians and fascists generally. I apologize for making the Tea Party out to be a purely grassroots movement. I don't even think it was slightly a grassroots movement. The supporters that were genuinely duped were energized against their own interests, however few genuine believers there were. Let me say this. I was talking before about the 2000s versus, Tea Party was more like 2009, 2010. That's when they all got elected to Congress, like the Rand Paul wave. Basically the 2010s is when the libertarians really started gaining some power. And again, it was through the Republican Party because the Republican Party had burned out its normal credibility. You look at how John McCain did in the election, for example. So they went with this. That was when the fake populism really started, was after Bush and Cheney, when it was clear that that wing of the party wasn't going to cut it anymore. They started going to the pseudo-populism, trying to capitalize off of the anger after 2008. Now, I'll say also, so in the 2000s, even, and this is not uniformly so, not by a lot, because you had the Jordan Maxwells and these people teaching and again, the John Birchers, and people teaching like really extreme, crazy conspiracy stuff. That said, like back then, the U.S. being as anti-communist as it is, there were people who were not communist doing a lot of, deep political research on the conspiracies, cover-ups, military covert actions, and other things that underpin U.S. imperialism. And it wasn't all crazy insane. But after 2009 and the emergence of the formal Tea Party as basically a Republican Party caucus, the IQ level dropped about 50 points. Like, it started getting really... there was a noticeable difference in just the quality of the reasoning and evidence that the right-wingers would cite. It was a lot more batshit stuff. So even when the Republican Party took in these, far-right fringe elements, fascist elements, proto-fascist elements, or at least what had previously been proto-fascist, and started bringing them into their party to keep their party existing, which, remember, it wasn't the first time that they had to shore up their numbers. They did it in the 80s under Reagan with the moral majority, because prior to that, before they brought in the evangelicals, who previously the evangelicals, while right-leaning, some of them didn't see politics as their duty to get involved with. So they would, some evangelicals saw it as that whole, give Caesar his due, basically keep earthly government and religion separate. But with the moral majority and all that, sort of the right-wing merger of religion in a serious way into the Republican Party, that happened like 70s into the 80s, continued in the 90s, in order that the Republican Party could keep their numbers up where they would be at all relevant. And then, Bush Cheney did that, Watch Jesus Camp, for example. But then after that, they had to pull in more numbers because Bush Cheney had started like multiple wars, crashed the economy, all this other stuff. So they had to scrape further down in that barrel, and they pulled up the Tea Party fucking whack jobs. But even when they did that, they defanged it. Because there were people who were ostensibly right-wing and would have been part of something like that, who would do some actual research that was factually accurate about, U.S. Covert actions and, the way that the U.S. Starts wars and various things. Now, some of it's also crazy, like Antony C. Sutton, who wrote several books, Wall Street and one of them is Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, in which he tries to make the case that Wall Street funded the Russian Revolution. It's like a libertarian Bible, that one. It's part of the reason that these people, against all evidence and against, what would be their better informed, rational class interests, still cling to their anti-communism because they believe in the work of people like Sutton, who say, no, all of the alternatives to capitalism are actually just other branches of capitalism. You can't get away from it. So the only thing that we can push for logically then is the freest capitalism that we can get. And so that's how some people end up libertarians, and it's almost logical. It's almost rational. Except when you break down the argument, well, did Wall Street really fund the Bolshevik Revolution? No. They didn't. No. So, yeah, if it was true, then you could see how people feel defeated and hemmed in, where no matter what we do, all of the big movements are always going to be controlled. Therefore, the only thing we can do is the freest capitalism that we can possibly have. Okay. It's wrong, but yeah, almost logical, except for the part where your evidence is afactual. Anyway, where was I going with all this? Is when they brought the Tea Party into the Republican Party, it was a dramatic step down, even from what you would find previously in the 2000s and 90s and 80s and so on. So, no, I'm not doing close mic stuff. Not for reals. Just as a joke. Okay. Well, anyway, I think I made the point there. And the person said, for context, they I'm a turn of the century baby, 98 to '02. Okay, well, that's fine. No, I mean, we're here to learn, so I appreciate that. But no. The Tea Party was very, very much astroturfed. Not all the people, like a lot of the people that got pulled into the Tea Party had indeed been fringe right activists for a long time, but they were calling up the reserves at that point, and again scraping the bottom of the barrel to actually bring them into the Republican Party in a serious way. The big new atheism push in the 2000s is what had been guiding me before my dive into Marx. And I mentioned this in a previous stream, I think, that, new atheism should have been a communist movement. And it wasn't, obviously. But, any movement that is, sort of focused on rationalism and things like that, how it gets polluted with capitalism is just amazing. But this is the kind of thick anti-communist environment that we live in the West. But yeah, imagine if all those new atheist, libertarian chuds had become communist instead. Would have been great. So, my dad had his conspiracy theory about the USSR that its 1917 revolution was also controlled by higher level people, and only Stalin escaped from their control. Children in Greece won't even hear the word communism or socialism, even to slander it. Regressive agitprop hits hard. I think ahistorical is an apt term to describe libertarians' ideas about capitalism. So yeah, just to mention that name again, Antony C. Sutton, it's fucking crap. Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, Wall Street and FDR. I'm trying to think of what the third one was. But he's like a libertarian fascist crackpot. I think he was writing a lot in the 70s and 80s. All right, anyway, back to COVID. After having been enlightened and uplifted by the beer can people. Now, where were we? So, I'm going to have to kind of do these in lightning round fashion, but here's an article from Forbes. More than half of long COVID patients suffer from organ damage up to 1 year after COVID infection. Okay, this is from 2 months ago. So, let's do a round of headlines. If there's one that really, really grabs me, then I'll get into that. I think I actually covered this article previously, but to give you an idea, this can be kind of a sampler and overview. I just don't want to get into the weeds with the first two articles and then not get to the rest. So let's do kind of a headline and summary overview, and then I've got at least another 45 minutes left. We'll get through all the headlines. We'll do some chat. If anybody, if there's a couple of articles that stand out, I'll read those. All right, another one. So a lot of people wonder about this. Will nasal vaccines lift us out of the pandemic? This is again from 2 months ago, February 2023, by William A. Hazeltine, who does good stuff on COVID, and we've covered a lot of his articles. I think the short answer is no, but let's kind of skim through this at least. There's been a great deal of buzz around nasal vaccines over the past 2 years. The idea is simple enough. Stop infection at the source. Since SARS-2 enters through the nasal passages in the lungs, bolstering our immune system in those areas may help to keep the virus out, preventing infection in the first place. Our current vaccines only protect against disease, so a booster that helps to stave off acquisition of infection would be a welcome addition to our pandemic control toolbox. The issue? I'm not optimistic that nasal vaccines will offer broad long-term protection. What follows is a brief overview of novel data on mucosal immunity and a reminder that, despite the excitement, we would do well to temper our expectations. So to summarize here briefly, he does a good job of getting into the technical stuff, an okay job of explaining it. I find when I do Hazeltine articles, I often have to do kind of a lot of at least medium lifting and breaking down the terminology he's using. I think it is written for more of a technical audience. But the idea here is if you can get sterilizing immunity in the first areas that the virus is likely to get into your body, your nasal passages, your pharynx, that's the area that connects your nose to your mouth, and then your mouth, your throat, your lungs. If you could get sterilizing immunity, basically like a bug zapper, as soon as the bug lands, it's gone. If you could get your mucosal immunity, your mucous membranes that line all of those respiratory passages, the breathing passages, if you could, deck out the lining of your respiratory system with viral bug zappers, if you will, then you could prevent the virus from ever taking hold and infecting you. So it would just be like zapped at the source and it wouldn't be able to get any deeper. That's the idea, and that's the idea behind nasal vaccines, that they would be basically inhaled through the nose, which is also how COVID tends to get into the body, can be spread through other means. It can be sexually transmitted. It can be transmitted, in other ways, but by far the airborne aerosol exchange is the most common one. Skipping ahead to the end of this, if natural infection, which enters through the respiratory tract, doesn't provide long-lasting protection from reinfection, why should nasal vaccines? It's a decent question, although imagine using the technology you could maybe tinker with it to make it do that. In general, if natural infection doesn't provide sterilizing immunity, which it definitely doesn't, you can get COVID and then get it a few weeks later, it's unlikely that vaccines will. One has only to look to influenza and cold-causing coronaviruses as examples of this unfortunate fact, which is a thorn in the side of vaccinologists. It's just like a standing issue for vaccines. They work, but they have not perfected them yet in this particular way. Another issue, albeit closely related to the first, is the fact that antibodies wane quickly, and IgA antibodies wane more quickly and drastically than others. So even if we use nasal vaccines as boosters, we would need to top up every 4 or 5 months. Well, I mean, that's what people are doing with their booster shots now, so, I mean, that'd still be better in a way. This may work in the short term, but in the long term, people will grow tired, as they have with current booster shots, and uptake will drop off. Again, as we covered yesterday, what percentage of Americans got, U.S. Americans got the updated bivalent booster? About 1 in 6, not very many. So yeah, that compliance has dropped off dramatically. The breakneck pace of viral mutation also has to be taken into account. For vaccines and antibodies to be effective, they need to match the dominant circulating variant. With new variants constantly vying for the top spot, the window of efficacy or effectiveness shrinks. In practice, this leaves us always one step behind. Well, you could say that about the shots as well. It takes about 6 months to manufacture the vaccines, and while the vaccine that they eventually come out with will still have some relevance, we'll be usually 3 dominant strains behind by that point, 2 or 3 dominant strains at least. And as we were mentioning before, in the case of BQ and XBB, they have already outpaced even the Novavax vaccine, which was better at targeting the conserved epitopes, the parts of the virus that are least likely to mutate. Those parts of the virus hadn't mutated for the previous 3 years of the pandemic. So Novavax felt confident saying, like, look, if we target this, then you're probably going to have lasting protection, even if the virus mutates. But then, lo and behold, the virus even mutated to be different in key areas that were being targeted by that. So I don't know. To me, it seems that this applies both to the nasal vaccine and to the shot. So we're always going to be behind on the vaccines. That's not a reason not to get them. You should get them. But it does mean that it's not going to end this pandemic in and of itself, which the CDC recognizes that. Yet what will end the pandemic is testing, mask mandates, specifically N95 or better mask mandates. Having the PCR test back, quarantine isolation, paying people to stay home, on and on, ventilation, filtration. But are they doing that? No. So by everyone's admission, the vaccines, while they curb severe disease, that's not the only problem. Even if you're fully vaccinated, your risk of long COVID is 1 in 6. It's not 0. So if we want to actually get rid of this thing, we got to do something better. But anyway, continuing. If we want a vaccine that offers long-lasting, broadly neutralizing protection, nasal vaccines likely won't be the best approach. In the meantime, our efforts may yield better returns directed at developing highly active combinatorial drugs that offer pre- and post-exposure prophylaxis or prevention. Yeah, but can everyone get those drugs? You know what I mean? I don't know that that's really the solution either. This has worked incredibly well in the battle against HIV/AIDS, for which there is still no vaccine. Yeah, but what's the prevalence of those? Like, you're dealing with way fewer cases of HIV and AIDS than with COVID. You're dealing with like how many tens of millions of cases a year of COVID in the US alone. And how many times will you be able to take those drugs, for example? Will they have toxicity as a potential problem that like some people wouldn't be able to take them? Or anyway, they could work equally well in the case of COVID-19. Continued research in the field of vaccines cannot come at the cost of tunnel vision. We must maximize all of the resources at our disposal. And again, these medical solutions are great, but the social solutions, like mask mandates and the other things that I mentioned, that should be 75% of it, should be the social solutions. But they interrupt business as usual, and they can impact quarterly profits, and that's really what this comes down to. So anyway, I wish these agencies would literally take their own advice. But CDC was bending over backwards not to recommend masking this past holiday season. That's documentable. They literally had a thing telling people to like cough into their sleeve. No, that's the worst. Like, that is the most, that's the advice you give kindergartners. For colds and flu, not something that can attack your immune system. Anyway, let's look quickly at, again, these are all going to be looking quickly at, but here's another one. This is from The Conversation, March 10. Long COVID leaves newly disabled people facing old barriers, a sociologist explains. So, again, I don't have time to get into most of these in detail, but let's read at least the beginning. Up to 1/3 of COVID-19 survivors will acquire the condition known as long or long-haul COVID-19. The American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation estimates that long COVID will add as many as 22 million individuals to the U.S. population of disabled people. Well, of course, that number will keep going up the longer this goes on. Time is a factor. I am a sociologist and researcher focusing on disability. I am aware of the challenges awaiting newly disabled people living with what scientists call post-acute sequelae. Sequelae are consequences, and post-acute means after those first few weeks. So long-term consequences of SARS coronavirus 2 infection. Again, SARS-2 is the virus that causes COVID. A condition in which someone with COVID-19 continues to have symptoms for weeks or months after infection, oftentimes up to a year. Some of the things don't even go away after a year. One of those challenges qualifying for Social Security supplemental income, the program that provides financial support to disabled people with limited resources. To receive support, applicants generally must show that they have a condition that greatly limits their ability to work. The program routinely denied the majority of applicants even before the pandemic. Between 2009 and 2018, the program denied 2/3, 66% of applicants. But the impact of long COVID, a newly discovered condition, is difficult to measure. Its symptoms are difficult to prove. We still have not found a biomarker. For example, a Boston study found that 60% of people with long COVID, but 0% of people who had COVID but didn't get long COVID, had the spike protein still in their body. But then there was another 40% of the people who had long COVID, but they couldn't detect the spike protein. So there may be multiple causes of it, and there's still not like one biomarker where you can just easily do that. You need multiple tests to determine, or multiple tests potentially, to determine if somebody had long COVID. I don't think we're anywhere near having a system like that set up at this point. So anyway, survival at a price. While most people recover from their initial acute infection, some survivors experience continued or newly developed symptoms. Long COVID symptoms can include shortness of breath, fatigue, and brain problems, such as difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. The Centers for Disease defines disability as, quote, any condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. And this is very true. The majority of people with neurological symptoms from long COVID were unable to return to work or do daily tasks. So anyway, let's just skip to the end here in the interests of this. But disbelief and denial. Currently, approximately 8 million people receive Social Security supplemental income. But surveys show that the Social Security Administration still denies many applicants, which studies have linked to stereotypes about disabled people as, quote, conning the system. A February 2021 study showed that negative attitudes towards people with significant disabilities are common among healthcare providers. That's why I'm constantly saying doctors fucking suck, and there must be some kind of screening process, as somebody was pointing out in the comments. You know, kind of like they pick the shittiest people to become cops. What is the screening process for the most like closed-minded people to become doctors? Well, I think part of it is just class. You're more likely to get wealthy people who've never really suffered in their life becoming doctors. It's not to say every, I said more likely. But there's definitely major issues with doctors being somewhat up on technical medicine and then being socially massively ignorant. Because again, you know, doctors on average make about $200,000 a year, and then if you're a specialist, it can be $400,000 or $500,000 a year. So you're definitely getting more into the reactionary, wealthier people at that point. Anyway, speaking of care, research on long COVID has led to, and of course that's going to affect the ability of those with long COVID to get the care that they need. Speaking of care, research on long COVID has led to proposed treatment guidelines, which do promise to help people live better with the condition, those who at least can get medical care, which we're in the United States, that is not a given. In another promising development, the Department of Health and Human Services and the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice recently announced that long COVID can qualify as a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. This means that those with long COVID can qualify for community resources. Those still in the workforce can get employment-related reasonable accommodations, such as flexible work times and remote work. For now, that's all they can count on. And, that's new. I'd like to see the percentage of people who claim long COVID and then actually get approved. That will be the next struggle. Like, okay, this is on the books now that you technically can get approved for that. But how many people actually will? What percentage actually will be approved? Now, here's a long article. This is from the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. Title is State Health Department Communication About Long COVID in the United States on Facebook. Risks, Prevention, and Support. And so what these 4 researchers did in 2022 is they studied, public health. A lot of that's about communicating facts about health and good health practices to the public. So, okay, Facebook. There's a lot of particularly older people, 40 or 50 and up on Facebook. How are the state health departments in the various U.S. states communicating via Facebook? What kind of messages? So there's something called content analysis. It's a form of qualitative research and analysis that you can do where you analyze messaging. I think it's a very interesting kind of research, but there's definitely parameters for this. You can take entire courses in content analysis. There's entire textbooks written on how to do content analysis, etc. So that's what these researchers did. They took to Facebook and they looked at all of the messages that the state health department people were, actually putting out there. So let's see what some of their conclusions were. So while state health departments posted extensively about COVID-19 on Facebook, posts relating to long COVID were rare between 2020 and the start of 2022. Overall, this low volume of messaging suggests a missed opportunity for U.S. state health departments to inform the public about risks and communicate positive messages that may promote uptake of preventative behaviors, including COVID-19 vaccines, given recent evidence suggesting that they may reduce the odds of persistent COVID-19 symptoms. Although HBM constructs were generally present, and unfortunately I don't know what that stands for. I'm not sure what that stands for. Suggesting that posts may encourage the adoption of desired behaviors. Is that health behavior modification? I don't know. Probably not. But they were using some constructs that are proven effective is what I'm getting out of this, which suggests that it may work. The volume of posts, particularly when compared with the volume of posts about COVID-19 more generally, i.e. rather than long COVID specifically, indicates that health departments did not find it a priority to communicate about long COVID. Therefore, the primary issue to be rectified regarding prevention is not so much the content of posts, but rather the limited attention that long COVID has received overall. So again, it's not so much the content of the long COVID posts that the health departments are putting out, it's the frequency, the quantity of them. They need to talk about it more. With regard to information serving those who already have long COVID, the issue is further compounded by appearing to be a marginal focus within what was already a marginalized communication issue. The paucity of messaging also meant limited information targeting those experiencing long COVID symptoms who may be unsure of where to seek assistance. Greater awareness of the severity and problems of long COVID may help to reduce stigma from family members, friends, and employers, and promote greater public and policymaker understanding of the differences between COVID-19 recovery and survival. With several state health departments not messaging about long COVID in any capacity on Facebook. In other words, most of them had low frequency, low numbers of posts. Some, that number was so low it was 0 on Facebook. The social media platform where health departments have the most followers, so it's very relevant, there's a critical need for increased attention. First, health departments that have yet to message about long COVID may wish to draw upon examples of messaging used by the health departments identified here. Let me just say, I'm going to call it there. Health department and public health messaging overall in the U.S. is atrociously bad and, just not even, in my opinion, doing the bare minimum. They need to do a lot more, which in the case of long COVID, you could say do a lot more on quite a number of topics. I mean, there have been successes in public health, like a lot fewer people smoke cigarettes now is like one example. Seat belts is like another example. There's so many other issues that the average person is really miseducated, confused, otherwise just not having the correct information about. Long COVID is a very costly one to not be educated about, and I'm not surprised by these findings whatsoever because U.S. public health, in my opinion, really sucks. Anyway, what else do we have? Oh God, this one, distancing. So, lost the screen there. This is from MarketWatch. People are long social distancing due to COVID-19. Economists say that's contributing to a drop in labor force participation. This is from December 2022. Labor force participation fell for the third month in a row in November as 13% of U.S. workers say they will continue social distancing. Another 45% say that they will do so in limited ways. So if you're not overly enthusiastic about running out there and exposing yourself to tons of COVID in the workplace through a job, you're not alone. This is kind of a widespread phenomenon, and there needs to be more attention on it. Really, I don't know of any, even the left parties, I'm not sure there's really anything happening on this. And so anyway, of course, MarketWatch's takeaway is that it is, costing the economy lots of money. Well, fuck the economy. They're talking about profits. They're not talking about the majority of people who participate in the economy. All right. This is by Antony J. Leonardi, PhD. If you're interested in particularly long COVID and the immune system, follow this guy on Twitter at HappierFitterAJ. But you can just search on his name too. Anthony J. Leonardi, Leonardi. Has an article from December, Immune Dysregulation and Repair. So we were looking at this before. I'm not going to go through it again, but he has gone through, he did his PhD specifically on T cells and has been tracking all of the research about COVID's harm to T cells, which are a crucial part of your immune system. This is being widely acknowledged now yet nothing's really being done about it. So there's this big gap between knowledge and action. And I feel like that is kind of the running story here. We did the alcohol story, and I wanted to also point out speaking of people on Twitter who are compiling research, just look at the long COVID hashtag. There's a lot of researchers posting about this. Here's at MeetJess. We know by now that COVID affects the brain. One infection can do serious damage. What will happen after multiple infections? Quick thread on COVID and your brain. Look that one up if you're interested. Here are some of the studies, though, that came out of that, and we will just look at abstracts really quickly. Here's the first one, and I did pull them out of this thread. Whoops, let's spell neuro correctly. All right. Inflammation, this is from June 2022 from Nature Reviews Neurology. Inflammation links mild COVID-19 with long-term cognitive impairment. Mild COVID-19, that is mild during the acute phase, the first few weeks, can have long-term effects on the brain via neuroinflammatory mechanisms. So neuro is nerves in the brain. Inflammation is inflammation. It can be a good part of a short-term healing response, very bad long-term. Neuroinflammatory mechanisms, according to new research published in Cell. The findings provide therapeutic targets for future work. After COVID-19, some people have long-term neurological symptoms that are similar to those of cancer therapy-related cognitive impairment. So people may have heard of chemotherapy for cancer causing brain fog. In other words, cancer therapy-related cognitive impairment. The long COVID is similar. And so the aim of this study was to assess are the same kind of neuroinflammatory processes that are found in chemobrain also, are they similar to or different from, or are they the same as what's going on with long COVID? Quote, moderate to severe and systemic SARS coronavirus 2 infection can affect the brain in several ways, including vasculopathy. So your vascular system is your blood vessels, and pathy means disease. So it's blood vessel disease. That can affect the brain, and also direct infection of the brain. But we set out to test the effects of mild respiratory infection alone on the brain, says Michelle Manji, who led the study with Akiko Iwasaki. Iwasaki shows up on a lot of stuff, another good person to follow. Here's SARS coronavirus 2 enters the cells via the human ACE receptor. So the researchers limited the location of the infection in mice by selectively inducing the expression of that ACE receptor in the respiratory tract. So in other words, these mice could only get infected there because they only had the receptors there. Mice received either intranasal SARS coronavirus 2 or mock infection, and cerebrospinal fluid samples were taken. So cerebrospinal fluid is the clear fluid that surrounds your brain and spinal cord. No, it is not semen. That was an entire thread we got into on Twitter just a few days ago from the semen retention folks, anti-masturbation advocates, wildly, grossly unscientific stuff. But anyway, cerebrospinal fluid. The tagline for cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. CSF, it's not semen. Anyway, we're taken either 7 days or 7 weeks after an infection to assess inflammatory markers. So inflammatory markers are compounds that show up that indicate inflammatory processes. Compared with the uninfected mice, the infected mice had higher CSF levels of multiple cytokines and chemokines. These are inflammatory signalers and regulators, as well as increased microglial activation in subcortical and hippocampal white matter. It's areas of your brain. Neuron generation, neurons are nerve cells, in the hippocampus, and the amount of myelin, that's the sheathing on the nerves, because your nerve cells conduct electricity basically, and just like a wire, they need to be insulated. The amount of myelin in the subcortical white matter were also both lower in infected mice than in uninfected mice. Let's say that again, neuron generation in the hippocampus, that's the part of your brain, it does various things, memory is one of them, and the amount of myelin in the subcortical white matter were both lower in infected mice than in uninfected mice. So the infected mice were not generating brain cells as much, and they had less myelin sheathing. So These findings point to the possibility that the infection does not need to happen directly within the brain to cause long-term damage. Because remember, these mice only had ACE receptors in their respiratory system. So you can breathe it through your lungs and still affects your brain in this way. The researchers now plan to test therapies being developed for the chemo brain in possibly working to halt this brain inflammation from long COVID. So possibly some of the treatments for that could be useful for the COVID brain fog. Let's do another one. I'm going to actually have to skip most of these. I had a lot of the neurology articles here from that thread. Here's another one. New study explores infection effect on fetal brain developments from last July. The risk of infection during pregnancy has always been a concern, but the high rate of illness during the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the potential impact of infection on a developing brain. To better understand the long-term consequences, a new Western University study has explored the effects of a pregnant person's immune response to a virus or bacteria on an unborn baby's brain development. And the study examined how later developmental changes can disrupt sensory processing abilities later in life, commonly seen in neurodevelopmental disorders, including autism spectrum disorder and schizophrenia. Quote, even before the pandemic, previous studies found that developmental disruption caused by infection during pregnancy can increase the risk of a child later developing autism or schizophrenia, said Faraj Haddad, the first author of the paper and former Western PhD neuroscience researcher. To examine this further, our study looked at a specific molecule called interleukin-15 and its involvement in the maternal immune response's effects on fetal brain development and behavior later in life. So let's move on. Actually, there's another thing here, so let's see if we get anything. Despite the complex findings, the study confirmed that the lack of interleukin-15 can affect an individual's behavior. Quote, it tells us that the interleukin-15 molecule plays a role in the normal development of the brain. This study paves the way for future work to explain fully how a maternal immune response can increase the risk for neurodevelopmental disorders. The ultimate goal of the research is to provide an antidote that will take away or at least reduce the risk for a developing baby. But until that time, vaccines are really important during pregnancy as they help to protect against severe infection and they reduce the maternal immune response. That interleukin is one of the things that comes out and changes due to the maternal immune response. And it can affect brain development. So in the baby, that's important. So there was something that came out this week along the exact same lines. And this is the study here in the American Academy of Pediatrics journal, was this from their website? Maternal SARS coronavirus 2, placental changes and brain injury in 2 neonates. Neonates are newborns. So this is a very new study, and it's getting a lot of press this week. It's from April 6th. Let's go to an article that summarizes it rather than trying to dig through it ourselves. It's from Reuters. COVID caused brain damage in 2 infants who were infected during pregnancy, according to U.S. study. So researchers at the University of Miami reported on Thursday what they believe are the first 2 confirmed cases in which the SARS coronavirus 2 virus crossed a mother's placenta and caused brain damage in the infants that they were carrying. Doctors previously had suspected this was possible, and we've covered things before showing massive placental damage due to SARS-2, and we also did a study last week about, we didn't conduct the study, read about a study last week about COVID infections in the first half of a pregnancy, upping the risk of a stillbirth. That's when the baby dies before birth. Clearly SARS-2 can affect babies in the womb. Doctors had previously suspected this was possible, but until now, there was no direct evidence of COVID-19 in a mother's placenta or an infant's brain. The babies were born to young mothers who tested positive for the virus during their second trimester before vaccines were widely available. Several viruses are known to be capable of crossing the placenta, that's of course the sac that the baby is developing in, and causing fetal brain damage, including cytomegalovirus, rubella, HIV, and Zika virus. The SARS coronavirus 2 virus has been detected in adult brain tissue, and some experts had suspected that it could also damage fetal brain tissues. The first time we've been able to demonstrate the virus in a fetal organ with trans or cross-placental passage. That's why we think this is so important. So yeah, SARS can hurt unborn babies as well, so mental note. A couple more things and we will end. I want to just briefly mention Biden is ending the pandemic, and I want to do more about this, and we definitely will. Let's see. Biden ends pandemic. Just want to get it into the record for today. President Biden officially ends COVID-19 national emergency. This is from UPI by Joe Fisher. Joe Biden signed a bill Monday to end the national emergency over COVID-19. The bill, sponsored by Paul Gosar, Republican from Arizona, terminates the national emergency declared by former President Donald Trump. I swear to God, every time I say the phrase former President Donald Trump, a part of me fucking dies. How bad does your country have to be before it gets to that level of falling for like snake oil salesmen? But not that the regulars are great, but boy, when you get down to Trump, there's a major fucking right. President Joe Biden signed a bill Monday to end the national emergency over COVID-19. The bill, sponsored by Gosar, terminates the national emergency, which was declared on March 13, 2020. It does not affect the public health emergency that was issued that January. They were going to end both of these on May 11, but they ended this one early. I don't know what difference that extra month made, except there are more states. Well, this had affected like Medicare expansions and things, or Medicaid, sorry. Actually, it might be Medicare expansions too, but here, let's just keep reading. So they had to just get an extra month in here, but the public health emergency is still extending till next month. The Biden administration initially opposed the bill and a separate measure led by Brett Guthrie, Republican of Kentucky, citing significant impacts on the government and healthcare system. First, an abrupt end to the emergency declarations would create wide-ranging chaos and uncertainty throughout the healthcare system, for states, for hospitals and doctors' offices, most importantly for tens of millions of Americans. Well, they're going to do it just a month later, so I don't see what the big difference is. It sucks either way is the point. They shouldn't be doing it either way. The statement also emphasizes that ending the public health emergency would also end Title 42, which the Biden administration attempted to end last fall before being blocked by a federal judge in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. Both declarations provide flexibility for the federal government and government health care programs. Medicare and Medicaid recipients did not face certain charges relating to testing for COVID, including at-home testing, for example. Some Medicare and Medicaid waivers will end with the public health declaration, while others will stay in place for another 6 months. Healthcare facilities also were granted waivers under the Public Health Declaration, giving them flexibility over patient care and capacity limits, some of which may or may not be in the patient's best interest. But anyway, telehealth will remain uninfected. That's where people get care from like online and telephone services. And what else do we have here? Oh, sorry, wrong one. There we go. Oh, no, that was it. All right. So yeah, Biden, everything is ending next month. Although some of it will be phased out over the 6 months between May and November. Hey, just in time for probably the next wave, because we have no reason to think that there's not going to be another wave next fall. Imploding country, self-destructive country, what can I even say? All right, let's do one. Everybody likes animals, so here's one about pets and COVID. From Medical Life Sciences News, study indicates that interspecies transmission of SARS coronavirus 2 between humans and their pets occurs regularly. This is from 10 days ago. In the recent study published in the Viruses Journal, researchers assessed several acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2, SARS coronavirus 2 seroprevalence among domestic dogs and cats in households with SARS coronavirus 2 positive humans in Germany. Now, I knew that cats could catch it. I didn't know about dogs. But they don't always get the same symptoms. So there's information on the screen now. Data on the role of pet pet animals and the dynamics of transmission are limited. So in other words, we know that the dogs and cats are catching COVID from the humans that they live with, because by analyzing the pet's blood, you can see that they have indicators that they had been infected. I'm looking through here. 170 dogs and 115 cats, respectively, from 177 households participated in the study. 50% tested SARS coronavirus positive using ELISA, 42% of cat serological samples, and 56% of dog serological samples tested positive. Okay. The actual seroprevalence rates for dogs and cats were 43 and 57% respectively. The determined seroprevalence for dogs was greater than that in cats, but it wasn't statistically significant, so it could have just been a coincidence. All right, so getting down to the end of this article, then we got one more, then we'll do chat, and then we're done for today. The findings indicated that SARS coronavirus 2 infected dogs and cats do not usually develop an illness resembling COVID-19 in humans. The frequency and intensity of human and pet contact influenced positively the risk of COVID-19 in pets. By influenced positively, I mean it made the risk go up. Thus, basic level hygiene measures must be followed during interactions with dogs and cats during COVID-19 to prevent mutual SARS coronavirus 2 infections. I skipped a screen, but I want to see, do they have information about people catching it from the pets? Because clearly the pets are catching it from the humans. So here's what happens. Cats with SARS coronavirus 2 seropositivity had a significantly greater likelihood of having more than average intensity of contact with owners. So the more contact they had with the owners, the more likely they were to get the disease. And same thing with dogs. Less contact with humans, less likely to catch it. The most prevalent symptoms were rest requirements, diarrhea, increased appetite, nasal discharge, coughing, labored breathing, and decreased resilience. Other symptoms included sneezing, degraded health, respiratory, and gastrointestinal symptoms. So I don't know if I'm just not seeing it. It's like they just studied you would need a different study to see if the people are catching it back from their pets. But, when we talk about animal reservoirs, like we did a story last January on deer catching COVID, probably from sewage runoff. And this is what happens. So animals can catch COVID. It can then mutate in them and sometimes jump back to us. All right, so last article, then we'll do a little chat and we're done. Here we go. And this is kind of, what all this comes down to in the end. Houston cardiologist. This is from Renew Houston. COVID may bring a, quote, tsunami of heart attacks in the future. This is from March 23rd by Lindsay Payton. And you can see there, Dr. Bikyam Bozkurt, professor of medicine, cardiology at Baylor College of Medicine, is shown pictured there. So, tsunami of heart attacks sounds bad. Mask mandates are being lifted across the U.S. as COVID infections continue to drop. Quote, but we're not in the green zone yet, said the doctor that they talked to. He worries that vaccine hesitancy and COVID fatigue might keep people from comprehending the severity of the current situation. Amen. The pandemic is still very much in effect, he added. Quote, the good news is that we can now treat COVID more effectively, and we have vaccines that prevent COVID effectively as well. Preventing deaths, lengthy hospitalizations, and long-term side effects is where getting vaccinated can make a world of difference, but that's not all. Quote, COVID itself affects the heart. If you are vaccinated, you are protecting against long-term effects on the heart. So, Dr. Bikyam Bozkurt, pictured above, professor of medicine cardiology at Baylor College of Medicine, said SARS coronavirus 2 causes inflammation and injury that can damage a number of organs. While the lungs might be the first organ that comes to mind when picturing a COVID infection, the heart is also at risk. I'll add in kidneys, pancreas, brain, there's a bunch. Quote, the effects of the infection can be multi-organ related, Bozkurt said. It involves not only the lungs, but the brain, the heart, the blood vessels. She added that the cardiovascular, cardio is heart, vascular is blood vessels, complications of the virus, including myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle. Myo is muscle, heart is heart, itis is inflammation, so muscle heart inflammation. Pericarditis, so it's swelling and irritation of the thin membrane around the heart attack, arrhythmia, that is irregular heartbeat, heart failure, cardiac shock, and increased danger of blood clot formation in the vascular system throughout the body. All of these risk factors are significantly elevated if a person is not vaccinated, Boskurt said. Continuing the quote, the mortality rates are higher. Talking about involvement of the heart in COVID infections. The mortality rates are higher with pre-existing conditions like high blood pressure and vascular disease in older individuals, but COVID-19 can also affect the young, healthy, and even pediatric populations. Carr said that COVID can result in both direct and indirect causes for heart complications. The virus can directly attack the heart, he explained, so it can infect your heart cells, or it can create a cytokine storm, which is basically, they explain there, cytokines are inflammation and immune mediators. If you get a cytokine storm, it is a hyperactive immune response which can cause damage in the body. So your heart cells can be directly infected and killed, or other things can be going on in the body which then wash back onto the heart and cause damage. Whenever there's a cytokine storm, inflammation mediators can affect multiple organs. Quote, it's like a nuclear bomb went off in your body, Carr said. For instance, heart failure can lead to kidney failure, or problems with breathing can limit the amount of oxygen in the blood. Quote, that can affect the heart, Carr said. Oxygen supply to the heart may be affected by blood clots inside arteries and veins, as well as severe decrease in oxygenation because of lung damage. He said he's concerned by the myriad complications that COVID is causing in the heart, as well as the long-term side effects. So, he pointed to a German study that looked at patients 6 months after recovering from a mild case of COVID, found 78% of them, mild cases of COVID, 78% of these patients had abnormalities on their MRI scans of the heart, 60% showed signs of inflammation. We don't know what the findings signify, but it's very alarming. In the worst case scenario, we could be seeing a tsunami of heart attacks in the future. It's too early to tell. They go on into long COVID, which we have covered. There's 2 more screens. Long COVID can be disabling. We're just getting to understand these risks. The statistics are staggering. Talking also about health inequalities. There's a higher incidence of infection, hospitalization, and death from the virus in Black, Latino, Asian, and Native American or American Indian populations. The racial gap is evident in the vaccines as well. So, yeah, the vaccines definitely will reduce your risk of all this. The problem, again, they don't reduce it to zero. So you still have to mask, just keep the virus from getting in, treat the vaccine as plan B, and you need that plan B, but plan A is the masking. It's not getting COVID in the first place. And again, you need a serious mask. N95 or comparable KN95, stuff like that. You need to have a secure seal around your face, or go the whole hog and get a P100 mask, which is the gold standard for preventing respiratory-borne, illnesses. So that's what we got. You look at Coolio, who last fall, he was 59 years old, suffered a long bout of bad asthma, difficulty breathing, then had a heart attack, again before the age of 60. Kind of sounds like COVID to me. There was the food author, Julie Powell, the age of 49, was tweeting about it, sick as a dog with COVID, recovers, quote unquote, from that acute phase, then drops dead of a heart attack like 6 weeks later, and on and on. Al Roker, older, 68, but still, rich, getting the best health care, gets COVID, gets blood clots that nearly kill him. And so this is how it goes. The cardiovascular implications of COVID are really, really bad. We covered a story years ago now. The pandemic's been going on over 3 years. Years ago now, about there was a mayor, I want to say Kansas City, where she was like 44 years old, fit, exercised regularly, got COVID, had to get a pacemaker. Her heart was so damaged. All right, let's go through the rest of the chat, and we are done for today. The Young Turks, or the Young Turfs, as people are now calling them, are a bunch of Democrats and Republicans who aren't Nazis. Cenk is a former Republican. Yeah, and actually, I would add what it took for Cenk to move out of the Republican Party. This is his story, was Bush-Cheney era torture policies. Remember when the Abu Ghraib thing came out and all that stuff? That's what it took for Cenk to leave the Republican Party. So, I mean, I feel like he's still basically a Republican at heart. I'd say the Deprogram's issues are all due to the hosts having personal faults. TYT, however, is corporate-sponsored me. Yeah, I mean, nobody's trying to compare the Deprogram to TYT. Oh, God, the Justice Democrats. I completely forgot about them. Even if the TYT anchors didn't suck, TYT would because of its ties to the Democratic Party, Justice Democrats, etc. My dad had long COVID. His health hasn't been the same since. He's in his mid-60s. That's exactly the kind of thing that we're seeing, yeah. There's a big YouTube channel called Physics Girl. Her long COVID is terrible. CDC is a complete joke. I mean, like, they have the research on their site. They're just not making the recommendations that, like, bear all of it out in full. They'll acknowledge it, but they're clearly downplaying the severity of COVID. And they've been called out for that on social media so many times, and they just won't respond to it in any kind of authentic way. In veterinary medicine, failure of nasal vaccines for coronaviruses are long known. Feline infectious peritonitis vaccines haven't been suggested for a decade or two. Yeah. Wait, you're telling me that public health and capitalism are mutually exclusive? I mean, the sort of like heyday of public health was back in the New Deal. I mean, it was like when we had more of a social democracy type system, then you got some public health. But even then it was like, just the basic stuff, vaccinations, like sanitation of water, stuff that is like largely taken for granted at this point. But like, it's very non-military. Like, I guess there's some like radical public health activists out there, but I think they tend to be socialists, so. Maybe a Cuban cigar will help with long COVID. I gotta see this. Take a look at that, thank you. A bug in my brain that I've had for a while is, why isn't 9/11 truth more prevalent in left spaces? Yeah, you and me both. I watched the Loose Change and other videos on S4A's channel, found them pretty compelling. My guess is that weirdo libertarians kind of hijack the ideas, as S4A likes to point out. Yeah, it means government bad, no government. And that it also doesn't actually matter that much. The U.S.'s response was exponentially worse regardless. I mean, we still talk about the pre-9/11 era. So I think on the Thin Blue Lies podcast, we're going to be doing some riffing off of the CIA podcast, the Langley Files. And right in there, I mean, they're touting the significance of the pre-9/11 era versus the post-9/11 era. 9/11 was the pretext for completely updating the entire surveillance security state, as well as launching multiple wars. So, yeah, I mean, it was very, very significant. And why isn't it more prevalent in left spaces? I think the question is, why aren't left spaces more prevalent? You know what I mean? We just have not had a left in this country, not really. That's kind of what I was saying in the beginning about, I got out there, hey, let's do anti-war stuff, let's do this and that. The left was fucking tiny. There were libertarians crawling all over the place. So why? It's liberalism. Because there's the anti-communism poisoned the left so much that everyone either became like an anarchist or a Democrat, and there just really wasn't much there, So again, that's what we're trying to build up now, trying to be part of that effort today, so. I agree. Like, I don't agree with the conclusions, the Rothschilds rule the world or whatever. That's the wrong conclusions. That's like, or the David Icke, like lizard people, crypto-fascist stuff. Yeah, those are the wrong conclusions. But when you look at some of the particular facts of particular events, undoubtedly those were, right-wing psyops to do more war and more surveillance and increase the military-industrial complex's prevalence in everyday life. I think that's indisputable. It's just we don't have a left, so you don't often hear like correct left interpretations of major events like that. I hope that that's changing now. I don't know. So dogs can catch COVID, but they don't transmit it as easily. The shelter in my city has shut down from an unknown respiratory virus. That must be that not COVID that's going around. Everybody's getting a really bad thing, but it's not COVID. Yeah, I hope I don't catch that not COVID. It's going around everywhere. Whoo, that was bad for... No, I'm not even reading. Sansamika, sit in the corner. I mean, it was a good bad joke, but it was too bad for me to read on the stream. Yeah, that's what I read. Cats can more easily transmit COVID to humans. That's what I read. I'd have to find the source on that, but I did see that a while back. Many children, adolescents, and young people, quote, suddenly drop dead in Greece. Indeed, must be that not COVID. Oh, Second Thought is a good gateway, not Hassan. Probably a better gateway. I don't know. I don't really watch. My thing with Second Thought is like, I haven't watched in a while, but I'll find like 75% of the video is really good, and then like the last quarter of it just kind of loses all the steam. That was kind of like a pattern I was noticing in the videos, so I don't know. I thought that Michael Rupert was incredibly insightful on 9/11. It was years ago that I listened to him, though. Yeah, I don't know. There were tons of flakes and grifters and charlatans that dropped in and out of that movement. Like I said, all the stuff from that time is like fatally poisoned with the hideous like boomer era politics. And just all the constitutional preservationists and like all that whole thing in the 2000s was like very tainted with like Bush and Cheney are taking us away from the Constitution. We got to bet, not very revolutionary. It was just like, we got to, defend the Republic and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know, that was kind of the most prevalent narrative about it, aside from like, yeah, there's war for oil or whatever, but people would get very, 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 very uncomfortable actually contemplating the idea that the government would, quote, do something like that, which to me is just massive cognitive dissonance. You think that they're going to like start a war for oil that's going to kill 1 million Iraqis. You don't think that they're going to like kill, a couple thousand people in this country? Like it doesn't make any logical sense. It's not sensible. So, okay, apologies. I wasn't trying to downplay the importance of 9/11 and its role in the institution of neoliberalism, or I would say upgrading neoliberalism for the 21st century. As the Bush-Cheney people called it, rebuilding America's defenses. They wanted to completely remilitarize the country, etc., and that's exactly what they did, using that and terrorism as a justification. Again, if you came into this after 2008, everybody stopped talking about terrorism, but literally from like the end of 2001 through 2008, it was just like terrorism, 24/7. I just meant that whether the U.S. government orchestrated it or not wouldn't have changed its effects. Well, if they hadn't orchestrated it, it wouldn't have happened. Do you see how that works? Okay. When there are no socialists to prosecute, they just go after minorities. Hey, they got to stay in practice, right? 9/11, a good example of how limitless capitalism is. I mean, these people, they're thinking in terms of the whole century. That's what they're going after. We need to be similarly far-reaching in our thinking as well. Oh boy, the article actually said, the one linked before the Cuban cigar, says nicotine patches help with long COVID. I just thought to add some pleasure. Jesus. Second Thought consistently makes 8 out of 10s, never a 10 out of 10. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I haven't watched that much in a while, so don't want to pass like too harsh of a judgment. I don't know. All right. Question about the Venus Project and Jacques Fresco's work. I'm actually not aware of it, but I'll make a note and I don't know. We'll see. They wouldn't supply the anthrax for the 2001 anthrax attacks, would they? Let me tell you this about the anthrax attacks from 2001. Who were those sent to? They were sent to opponents of the war on terror. Would that make any sense if it was sent from like the people that the war on terror was going after? No. If the anthrax was sent by the people who were, quote, the terrorists, then they would be happy to have senators and people opposing the war on terror. right? Because that means the U.S. wouldn't be coming after them. They wouldn't be sending anthrax to the people who were the most vocal opponents of the war on terror. Just saying. Just saying. Yeah, beyond that, I don't know. I'm sure there's details about that somewhere. I don't know. But that was the thing that stood out to me. People also had various questions as we wrap up about internal peripheries. If that was your question, can you ask it again? Because I don't know what the question was. Internal peripheries are a term in geography that describe, usually you think of the periphery of being the undeveloped space on the edges of a territory, but internal peripheries are, sort of like the Rust Belt in America. There's this sort of loaded term, sacrifice zones, I think is Chris Hedges' term, to describe where it's like it's an interior region, but that is sort of lacking in basic facilities and things like that. Anyway, I'm not sure what the question was. I wasn't familiar with the term. I looked it up. That's what an internal periphery is. But if you could ask the question again, I don't know what you're asking about them. Somebody else asked about the veil of ignorance thought experiment. I don't know. Maybe we can do that later. It is what it is. It's one of these kind of philosophy games. I don't know that it really contributes that much to the discussion. But yeah, and then the Venus Project and Jacques Fresco. We'll keep that in the notes for next time. Otherwise, that is about it for today. Oh, the Venus Project. Was that the Zeitgeist thing? I think fellow traveler talked about that. I don't know. All right, anyway, we're going to leave it there for today. Somebody also asking about Craig Hewlett, friends with Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone is a liberal, through and through. All these people, Anthony Sutton, Ron Paul, I don't know. We need to do better, okay? That's I guess, my thing. We need to do better than Ron Paul and Anthony Sutton and Oliver Stone and all of these people, and we can do better, and we will do better. All right. That is it for today's stream. Thank you all again for showing up, and everyone for modding who contributed to the modding. And we will be back with more audiobooks very soon, and then more streams in 6 days. We'll be doing this again on Wednesday next week. So until then, thanks. Stay safe. That COVID stuff wiped me out, so I got to go do something fun. But appreciate everybody showing up and listening on YouTube and SoundCloud and Spotify, where we are now. Check pinned comment for links to those accounts.